The troops of the Murim had been driven into a trap encircled by 3 mountains. After the battle, the ground they occupied was drenched in corpses, soaked in blood, and heavy with a suffocating stench. The number of those who had fallen in this single place alone surpassed 2,800. All the heads of the top clans remained alive, with the exception of the 6 leaders of the forces of justice. Amid the aftermath, a woman stood trembling, unable to contain her grief. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the lifeless bodies scattered across the land. Her eyes, once clear and composed, were now swollen from relentless crying. Jigal Sohi, the strategist, continued to apologize repeatedly, her voice breaking as she faced the dead. From atop the mountain, 2 figures observed her. One was Chun Inji, the former lord of the demonic cult. Beside him stood Chun Yo-won, the current lord. Chun Inji expressed his gratitude, acknowledging that mercy had been shown to Shaolin at his request. He reflected that the bloodshed had far exceeded his expectations, yet he understood that martial artists, even when cornered, would rather die than suffer humiliation. Deep within, Chun Inji contemplated the 600 who had chosen death over submission to the poison. He recognized that they likely refused in order to avoid becoming a burden to their families under its control. Drawing from the teachings he had once received from Shaolin, he felt that Yo-won's methods were far more ruthless than what he himself would have considered. Chun Yo-won stated that they had been given a choice, and there had been no reason to spare those who refused the poison. He revealed that his original intention had been to slaughter them all. 2 days earlier, inside the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult's meeting tent, news had arrived that the Murim Alliance sought to pit Chun Yo-won against the God of the East. Jigal Sohi had entered the barracks of the demonic cult's lord and immediately dropped to her knees. With tears filling her eyes, she pleaded desperately for her faction to be spared. Chun Yo-won dismissed her coldly, stating that such matters were not for a prisoner of war to concern herself with, and ordered her to leave. Jigal Sohi persisted, explaining that many had been forced into the war against their will, and questioning whether they should not strive to reduce meaningless sacrifice. At that moment, Markim rebuked her harshly, pointing out that she had forgotten her status as a prisoner of war simply because she had been allowed to move freely. He immediately ordered that she be restrained. As the cultists stepped forward to seize her, Jigal Sohi cried out desperately, pleading for them to stop and listen. She begged with urgency, insisting that if Chun Yo-won showed even the slightest trace of generosity, she would ensure that those under her faction would surrender instead. At her words, Chun Yo-won's interest was stirred. He regarded her with curiosity, recognizing that she was proposing a strategy of her own. Jigal Sohi clarified that she was not asking for everyone to be spared, only that those who chose to surrender be allowed to live. She placed her life on the line as she made this plea. Chun Yo-won questioned her, seeking confirmation that she truly believed she could make them surrender. She affirmed it without hesitation. Deep within, Jigal Sohi reflected on everything she had witnessed so far. She recognized that Chun Yo-won held no mercy for his enemies, and resolved that reducing their losses, even slightly, was the best she could hope for. Chun Yo-won agreed to hear her out. After listening to her proposal, he considered it carefully. The plan was not without merit. If executed as she suggested, it would inevitably divide the orthodox martial artists. Yet, he ultimately rejected it. He acknowledged that while the plan was interesting, those who survived could later stand in his way. With that reasoning, he dismissed her request and ordered her to leave. Jigal Sohi, who had come with only a sliver of hope, was forcibly dragged out of the barracks as her pleas echoed in vain. At that moment, Chun Inji intervened, and the two stepped outside to converse privately. Chun Inji urged him to reconsider the young strategist's proposal. Chun Yo-won remained firm. He stated that the Orthodox Murim Alliance had repeatedly ignored his attempts at peace. He pointed out that their massive force at Changbai Mountain had been brought with the intent to eliminate both him and the Six Swords troop, making further mercy seem meaningless. Chun Inji countered by echoing Jigal Sohi's words, emphasizing that not all of them had come to the battlefield of their own will. As he studied Chun Yo-won, Chun Inji realized that persuasion would not come easily. Adjusting his approach, he shifted the argument. He raised the idea of unifying the entire Zhonghu, explaining that such a goal could not be achieved through slaughter alone. He reasoned that ruling through sheer force would only breed endless resistance resistance and complications. A true ruler, he explained, must balance punishment with reward, and genuine unification could only come by subjugating others and governing them. Chun Yo-won responded that he had no desire to become a tyrant. However, he made it clear that if his enemies continued to target him despite being given multiple chances, they would have to face the consequences. He then questioned whether Chun In-ji's stance was influenced by his connection to Venerable Gu Jung. After a brief pause, Chun Yo-won relented. He acknowledged the reasoning and agreed to show mercy. Chun In-ji expressed his gratitude. However, Chun Yo-won made it clear that he would modify the plan. That addition came in the form of the pills. While Jagal Sohi's original proposal had ended with sparing those who surrendered, Chun Yo-won ensured that such mercy would not become a future threat. By forcing the survivors to take the pills, he guaranteed they would not act recklessly after being spared. It served as a warning to the forces of justice. With more than 2,000 people having taken the pills, the Murim would no longer even consider revenge. Soon after, the aftermath was settled. The battlefield was cleared swiftly, leaving behind only the countless corpses that marked the end of the conflict. At Chun In-ji's question about their next destination, Chun Yo-won gave a firm nod. He stated that their priority was to obtain the Wind-White Tiger's essence core. At the same time, in the Shaanxi province of the eastern region, Hwang Hyo, his body wrapped in bandages, moved toward the southwest. Originally, they had remained near Changbai Mountain, intending to provoke a clash between the Murim and the demonic cult, but there was no longer any reason for them to stay hidden. Hwang Hyo burned with frustration, cursing the Orthodox Murim alliance for deploying their forces even to Hwang Mountain. His subordinate questioned how their location had been exposed. Hwang Hyo admitted he did not know, but dismissed it as unimportant compared to the urgency of the situation. He emphasized that 20,000 enemy troops were advancing against their mere 4,000 stationed at the base. If that stronghold fell, their entire plan could collapse. He noted that the Blade Master should already be crossing Shaanxi with elite forces, and declared that, despite the importance of the Wind-White Tiger's essence core, this crisis took priority. He urged them to move quickly. The two riders soon halted near a ridge. A deep rumble echoed as a massive group approached in the distance, nearly 1,000 riders moving together. Even from afar, their identity was unmistakable as the elite troops of the Berserk Saber of the Sixth Martial Arts sect. Relief spread across Hwang Hyo as he realized they had not arrived too late. He urgently called out to the Great Supreme, asking about the Blade Master and reporting that their base at Hwang Mountain was under attack by the Orthodox Murim alliance. He insisted that the message needed to be spread immediately. The old man responded with a calm smile, assuring him there was no need to worry. He revealed that the Blade Master had already received the message and had departed alone for the base 4 days earlier. Hwang Hyo was left bewildered, unable to understand why, if the base was in danger, they themselves were heading elsewhere. The old man let out a quiet laugh and explained that they were bound for Changbai Mountain under the Blade Master's orders. Confusion deepened within Hwang Hyo as he questioned the purpose of such a move. The old man dismissed his concern, stating that the Blade Master would soon join them and that their only task was to follow the given orders. Meanwhile, at Hwang Mountain in Zhejiang Province, a massive battle raged. Nearly 20,000 warriors, comparable in scale to a nation's army, clashed fiercely against the base of the Berserk Saber of the Sixth Martial Arts sect. The battle had already stretched on for half a day, and the defenders had barely managed to hold their ground. Despite these efforts, the Murim forces appeared to be steadily gaining the upper hand. Though resistance remained strong, the tide of the battle suggested that if it continued at this pace, the base would fall by nightfall. Amid the chaos, Yi Mok, who led the assault, moved with decisive force. With a cold snort, he unleashed air swords toward the archers positioned along the mountain cliffs. A violent surge of power tore through the enemy ranks, and in a single onslaught, more than 50 lives were cut down by his hand. Peng Chung-won acknowledged the enemy's resolve, noting that the entire mountain had been transformed into a fortress. Yi Mok responded with confidence, stating that their defenses would not hold for long. He relayed that the Jegal clan's formation artists had estimated 4 hours to dismantle the traps at the entrance. Within his mind, Yi Mok calculated the outcome. He intended to seize the base by nightfall and use it as an ambush point. If everything proceeded as planned, he believed they would be able to eliminate both the demonic forces and the Berserk Saber of the Sixth Martial Arts sect within 2 weeks. Raising his voice, Yi Mok called upon the warriors of the Orthodox Murim alliance to claim victory and lay the foundation of justice. His rallying cry ignited the battlefield, and the warriors roared in unison. In the midst of the chaos, another fighter fell, cut down by a master of the Berserk Saber. Though most of their elite members were believed to be absent, it became clear that individuals nearing the Supermaster level still remained among them. At that moment, Yimok identified the archer responsible and prepared to strike with an air sword. Before he could act, a calm voice addressed him, identifying him as the leader of the Orthodox Murim Alliance. Startled, Yimok froze. An unfamiliar man wearing a bamboo hat stood directly before him. A jolt of realization struck him. He had been so focused on the battle that he had failed to notice the man's presence until he was already within striking distance. Yimok demanded to know his identity. Nearby, Pung Chungwon of the manhwa clan was equally shaken, having also failed to sense the man's approach. The man remarked that it had been a long time since anyone had dared to aim a sword at him. With a simple motion of his hand, he unleashed a surge of immense energy. The force carved a straight path through everything before it. Pung Chungwon, who stood along that unseen line, was split cleanly in two before he could utter a single cry. His body collapsed in separate halves, striking the ground with a dull thud. Shock rippled through the battlefield as the fall of their leader was witnessed. Yimok's eyes trembled as he grasped what he had just seen. The man had wielded invisible energy, an ability beyond ordinary comprehension. Struggling to steady himself, Yimok demanded the man's identity once more. The man revealed himself as the one who stood at the pinnacle of all blade arts. With the warriors of the North Sea Ice Palace, along with the 6 swords and their men, a force of nearly 600 advanced toward the south. At the front, Chun Yo-won rode on horseback, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. In contrast, Chun In-ji's face remained shadowed with concern. His unease stemmed from what he had heard before their departure for Changbai Mountain. Within Shaolin Temple, the only remaining member of Eunjarim was Monk Wu-chun, in gratitude for the mercy shown to the Shaolin monks, and out of respect for Chun In-ji, Wu-chun had shared crucial information. He spoke of a mysterious man in a bamboo hat and the overwhelming murderous intent that had emanated from the mountain. Wu-chun described how a single strike from that man had been enough to incapacitate numerous masters. He clarified that their earlier attempt to provoke a confrontation between the demonic cult leader and the god of the East had not been born from underestimating the latter. Though as a member of the Murim Alliance, he naturally opposed Chun Yo-won as a monk of the hidden recluse forest. He could not wish for Yo-won to be driven recklessly into such a battle. He then revealed his unease from that day. The god of the East had not seemed intent on blocking their path to Changbai Mountain, but rather on protecting them from something else. As they retreated, an intense and unfamiliar murderous intent had pressed down upon them. While others believed it belonged to the combative divine, Wu-chun felt something was wrong. It had not been his presence. Deep in thought, Chun In-ji reflected on the meaning of such power. The ultimate realm that all martial artists aspired to allowed one to unleash immense force with even the slightest movement. The god of the East, capable of such feats, had undoubtedly reached the very pinnacle of martial prowess, perhaps even standing as the strongest master in all of Jianghu. Yet despite hearing all of this, Chun Yo-won remained completely unshaken. Chun In-ji pondered the reason. He wondered whether Yo-won concealed his concern to avoid worrying him, or if he truly possessed the strength to face such an opponent without fear. Regardless of the answer, Chun In-ji reached a conclusion. The god of the East would inevitably attempt to stop them from entering Changbai Mountain, and when that moment came, conflict between them would be unavoidable. As they advanced, Hobum's voice rang out with excitement as he spotted the mountain ahead. Delighted, he spoke of a legend that a lake at its peak touched the heavens, wondering if it was truly real. Baek-ji let out a sigh, dismissing his words as nonsense. Mo Young-yu admitted that he no longer knew the path from that point onward. Chun Yo-won responded with a quiet murmur. As he observed the mountain, he sensed the dense spiritual energy radiating from it. He recognized it as an ideal place for internal energy cultivation. Yet, he noted the absence of the god of the East's presence and concluded that they would confirm it once they moved closer. Without hesitation, he gave the command to advance. At once, the cultists resumed their march, forming a straight, narrow line as they moved forward. Mo Young-yu rode ahead, his thoughts thrown into turmoil. He recalled his grandfather's repeated warnings to never approach this place, and disbelief weighed heavily on him as he found himself there. Deep inside, he could only hope that he would survive what lay ahead. Meanwhile, Hobum continued his speculation, recalling the dragon turtle's form and wondering if the wind-white tiger would resemble a white tiger with pure white fur. Wang Hul casually agreed. Hobum went further, imagining that it might even possess wings due to the wind in its name. In the next instant, the atmosphere shifted. A chilling sensation swept through the forest. The birds perched on nearby trees burst into flight all at once. Hobum reacted immediately, his expression sharpening before he even spoke. A fierce wind stirred, and the horses began to wail in distress, forcing those at the front to halt abruptly. Markham observed that it felt as though the entire forest trembled in fear. He admitted that he had never encountered such overwhelming murderous intent before. Munku trembled as the bloodlust pressed down upon them, realizing that it was powerful enough to engulf everything nearby. Chun-Inji dismounted his horse and scanned the surroundings. He recognized that their unseen opponent had appeared, yet he could not pinpoint the exact location due to the sheer intensity of the murderous aura. It baffled him that such hostility was directed toward them, despite no prior encounter. He turned his gaze toward Chun Yo-won. What he saw was unusual. Yo-won, who had remained composed until now, stood with a rigid expression. As he analyzed the energy, he realized it did not belong to a human. It resembled something far more primal, like that of a wild beast, making it impossible for him to gauge its level through conventional martial understanding. From the direction of his gaze, the sound of something cutting through the air rapidly approached. Chun Yo-won dismounted at once, recognizing the incoming presence. In the next moment, a figure surged forward at tremendous speed, closing the distance in an instant. Yo-won raised his hand, drawing the white dragon blade from his waist. A streak of light clashed against the incoming force. A violent surge of energy erupted from the impact, sending shockwaves through the surroundings. Those nearby were forced to retreat under its pressure. Even Chun-Inji, Markim, and Dan Juchun, each a supreme master, struggled to withstand it, their bodies driven back nearly 10 steps despite their strength. Chun Yo-won carefully observed the presence before him. The force he sensed was unmistakably that of a blade, yet it differed from anything used in Zhongyuan. The man's strength was far from ordinary. When measured purely in power, he stood on equal footing with him. A low murmur escaped the man dressed in black, his tone laced with excitement, though the language he spoke was unfamiliar. Hearing the strange words, Chun Yo-won tensed, confusion rising within his mind as he tried to identify the language. He immediately called upon NANO. NANO analyzed the speech and determined that, despite the presence of mixed regional dialects, it was Korean, the language of a land located east of Zhongyuan. Yo-won ordered NANO to translate. Through the translation, he understood that the man intended to kill them all before someone else arrived. With that, Yo-won questioned whether the man was the god of the East. The man in black reacted to Yo-won's words, stepping back slightly as he increased the distance between them. He then asked if Yo-won was from Goryeo. Recognizing the reference to the Eastern nation, Yo-won denied it with a shake of his head. A grin spread across the man's face as he remarked that someone from Goryeo would not sneak in from the north like a rat. Undeterred, Yo-won questioned him again, asking if he truly was the god of the East. He began to explain that they had not come to fight him and that their purpose at Changbai Mountain. Before he could finish, the man suddenly closed the distance. His blade shot forward, aimed directly at Yo-won's throat. Yo-won reacted instantly, his white dragon blade intercepting the strike just inches before it could claim his life. As the clash rang out, Yo-won recognized the terrifying speed behind the attack. Without his full focus, he would have already been killed. The man acknowledged his skill, noting that Yo-won was the first person, aside from another, to block his attacks twice. Yet his tone sharpened as he questioned what Yo-won had meant about Changbai Mountain. In the next instant, the man unleashed a tremendous surge of energy through his sword. The energy carried the nature of wind, yet it was no ordinary wind. It was sharp, compressed, and deadly, like countless invisible blades. Yo-won's eyes flickered in realization as a thin cut opened across his cheek. Wiping away the blood, he assessed the situation within his mind. This man did not match the description Wu Chun had given of the god of the East. The man in black, clearly irritated, pointed to his sword and corrected them. He declared that they had all made the same mistake. This was not Changbai Mountain, but Mount Bakadu. The moment those words left his lips, he soared into the air. A violent current spiraled around him as a tornado began to form, expanding into a massive storm of wind. What made it even more terrifying was the energy embedded within it. Every gust carried the sharpness of a blade, slicing at anything it touched. In that moment, the man no longer resembled a human being. He stood like a natural disaster given form. The warriors of the demonic cult watched in silence, their expressions darkening as they faced the overwhelming crisis before them. The man in black mocked them with cold amusement, correcting their mistake once more as he declared that this was not Changbai Mountain. Despite that, he expressed that it made no difference. He would kill them all there regardless, laughing at the futility of having corrected them at all. At the same time, atop the highest peak of Changbai Mountain, the god of the east, Ark Wui, remained deep in meditation. Yet something disturbed his stillness. He sensed a powerful wind surging from the north. The true chi within it was so immense that it reached even Heaven Lake. Though he had been wary of threats from the west, he realized that someone had already moved ahead of him in another direction. It became clear that this individual had long prepared for this moment. What unsettled him further was that this power of wind had not been used against previous intruders. That could only mean one thing: someone extraordinarily powerful had entered the mountain. He grew concerned that the 10-year oath might now turn dangerous. If he failed to intervene, Changbai Mountain could once again be drowned in blood. Turning his gaze northward where the violent gusts were forming, he understood there was no time to waste. His figure vanished in an instant. At the same time, dark clouds began to gather in the northern skies. Back on the battlefield, Chun Yo-won analyzed the situation. He sensed an extremely sharp chi embedded within the raging winds, and realized that the mist and the gusts were merging into something far more dangerous. If they remained where they were, catastrophe was inevitable. Orders rang out immediately, commanding everyone to move and avoid the wind. The warriors at the front quickly maneuvered their horses away. However, those already too close to the storm found themselves unable to escape. The winds howled violently. The horses froze, as if bound by an unseen force, before being dragged helplessly toward the growing tornado. Before they could even be pulled in completely, whip-like gusts sliced through them, tearing flesh apart and scattering blood into the air. Ko Wang-hul stepped forward, his fist clenched as his blue force chi surged to its peak, glowing intensely. He shouted for the others to stop hesitating, declaring that they only needed to eliminate the one controlling the wind. At his command, multiple streams of projectile chi were unleashed, cutting through the swirling winds as they aimed directly for the center of the tornado. Though the storm was violent, it was still wind, something that could be broken through by sufficient power. But the moment their attacks reached it, everything changed. A deep rumble echoed. Shock spread among them as they realized that chi itself was embedded within the wind. From within the storm, the man in black mocked them, calling them foolish. With a single motion of his hand, the chi that had been swallowed by the tornado surged back outward. The very attacks they had launched were returned. They shot back toward the demonic cult at terrifying speed. Sharp bursts of energy tore into them, drawing cries of pain as blood spilled. The six swords were equally shaken. Realizing that evasion was impossible, they focused on blocking instead. Steel clashed against the returning force. To their shock, the chi had grown even stronger after passing through the tornado, forcing them backward under its pressure. Moonku stepped forward, gathering her energy as she attempted to intercept the incoming force with her bare hands. Before she could fully endure it, Yo-won appeared and seized the attack himself. His grip halted its momentum. Moonku, startled, looked at him as he spoke calmly, assuring her that it was not a serious threat. He instructed her and the others to maintain their distance from the gusts. She steadied herself and obeyed without hesitation. Chun Inji drew his sword, disbelief surging through him as he witnessed the overwhelming force before them. The sight of a single man conjuring a tornado defied everything he knew of martial arts, resembling a natural disaster rather than a human technique. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, calling out to Markham that they had to stop the one controlling the wind. Markham responded immediately, and the two charged ahead. Dan Juchin, the newest among them, stepped in as well. Raising his sword, he unleashed a powerful surge of cold chi and formed an air sword, joining the assault. Chun Inji's blade, infused with concentrated chi, struck toward the tornado, attempting to break through it. It was deflected effortlessly. Shock rippled through him as he realized that even a strike poured with his full power could not penetrate the storm. Beside him, Markham's air sword finally shattered. The backlash of his own energy surged through his body, forcing blood from his mouth as it seeped through the gaps of his mask. From within the storm, the man in black mocked them, calling them arrogant for believing they could pierce his wind. As the tornado intensified, the weapons used against it began to break apart under the pressure. Chuninji staggered as his attack collapsed, coughing up blood before dropping to one knee, but the danger did not end there. The shattered fragments of their blades were hurled back toward the demonic cult like deadly projectiles. In that instant, Chun Yo-won acted. He formed an energy barrier, intercepting the incoming shards before they could strike the warriors behind him. Even a slight delay would have resulted in severe injuries among his men. He had already considered the same approach as the others, yet witnessing its failure left him momentarily troubled. Then something caught his attention. Amid the chaos, one attack had succeeded. Dan Juchin's air sword had pierced through the tornado. For a brief moment, relief crossed Dan Juchin's face as he saw his strike break through. But that hope vanished just as quickly. The moment the sword entered the storm, its energy was severed. It lost its force and was hurled back toward him. Dan Juchin reacted swiftly, raising an ice barrier to block the returning strike. Chun Yo-won appeared beside him. He questioned how the attack had managed to pass through. Dan Juchin, slightly confused, explained that he had infused both sword chi and cold chi into the strike. At those words, Yo-won's eyes widened and the realization struck him instantly. It was the cold chi that had allowed the attack to pierce the wind. He analyzed the nature of the tornado. Its essence was rooted in wind, meaning that even if he forced his way through it with brute strength, his energy would inevitably be weakened in the process. Dan Juchin then warned him that controlling a chi sword within the tornado was extremely dangerous. The moment his blade had entered, his connection to it had been severed, cutting off his true chi entirely. Within his mind, Chun Yo-won analyzed the nature of the storm. He realized that the tornado was formed from true chi imbued with the properties of wind and immediately turned to NANO for clarity. NANO explained that while it could not fully define it in technical terms, the phenomenon resembled a natural tornado formed by the collision of opposing currents, like cold air from the clouds clashing with the heated air near the surface. It could be understood as a surge of energy driven by intense heat. Yo-won asked how it could be stopped. NANO responded that if he could control either of the two opposing currents, he should be able to disrupt and collapse the tornado. Accepting the possibility, Yo-won resolved to attempt it. Meanwhile, the storm advanced toward the retreating members of the cult. The man in black watched with a sneer, declaring that he would kill them all. At that moment, Yo-won stepped forward and blocked the incoming gusts of wind. The man mocked him, claiming that his wind could not be stopped head-on and that Yo-won would only be crushed if he persisted. In response, Yo-won raised both hands. A surge of cold chi erupted outward. From within the raging winds, countless ice swords began to form in midair. The man's expression twisted as he sensed the overwhelming cold energy. He realized that such power far exceeded normal human limits and deduced that it must originate from a mythical creature's essence core. Enraged, he shouted that he would crush Yo-won before he could complete whatever he was attempting. In the distance, Wang Hul noticed that the tornado was accelerating, its chi expanding outward with increasing intensity. Munku cried out in warning, urging Yo-won to be careful. Undeterred, Yo-won gathered his strength and unleashed the ice swords. They shot forward in unison, colliding against the tornado in rapid succession. Some shattered on impact, while others embedded themselves within the storm. The man was visibly shaken, unable to comprehend how so many ice swords could be controlled simultaneously. Seizing the moment, Yo-won closed the distance and declared that if the man refused to emerge, he would force him out. From afar, the cultists watched in disbelief as the tornado began to weaken. Within the storm, the man struggled. He realized that maintaining the rotation of the wind was becoming increasingly difficult as the cold chi suppressed the heat sustaining it. At the same time, Yo-won felt the strain. Continuously forming ice swords while resisting the force of the tornado drained a vast amount of his true chi. Gradually, the storm began to lose its power. The violent gusts faded, dispersing into nothingness. As the wind vanished, the man in black reappeared, his eyes burning red with fury. Before he could react further, Yo-won moved. In an instant, he rose into the air and appeared directly before him, wielding the white dragon blade in one hand and the sky demon sword in the other. With perfect synchronization, he unleashed two techniques at once, merging them into a seamless assault. The clash erupted with explosive force as their attacks collided. The man roared in anger, dismissing Yo-won's confidence as arrogance born from dispelling the tornado. Yet Yo-won remained focused, studying him closely. The man's eyes were unnatural, not the result of reverse blood demonic arts, but something more primal, resembling that of a beast. Their blades continued to collide violently, sending sparks scattering through the air. Watching from below, the elders of the demonic cult were unable to hide their shock. Markeem in particular was stunned as he realized that the man had blocked the Demon Lord's sword. The technique he used was unlike anything from Zhongyuan, leaving his identity shrouded in mystery. A sense of unease settled deep within Chuninji as he observed the battle. Everything felt wrong. From what he knew, the god of the East did not use weapons, yet the young man before them wielded a blade with overwhelming mastery. Doubt crept into his thoughts as he questioned the man's identity. Still, the level of martial skill displayed was undeniable. Each strike was not part of a flowing sequence, but rather an individual culmination of power, every movement resembling a finishing technique on its own. Unlike anything seen in Zhongyuan, the clash of blades rang out continuously. On the other side, the man facing Chun Yo-won was equally shaken. Despite the harsh words he had spoken in anger, his focus had shifted entirely toward finding even the smallest opening in Yo-won's defense. Within his mind, he acknowledged the truth. Against any ordinary opponent, his attacks would have ended the fight several times over, yet Yo-won still stood. The blade technique he faced stirred a sense of familiarity within him, as though he had encountered it somewhere before. But there was no time to dwell on it. Yo-won's relentless offense gave him no room to think. Realizing that even the slightest lapse would lead to his defeat, the man resolved to eliminate Yo-won without delay. In a blur of motion, he surged forward once again, their swords colliding violently. Yo-won observed the shift instantly. The man had grown even faster. Though Yo-won knew his own chi reserves were superior, his opponent compensated with extraordinary speed, escaping every dangerous situation with movements that flowed like the wind itself. Recognizing this, Yo-won altered his approach. Instead of pursuing sequential attacks, he chose to strike simultaneously. As their blades clashed, Yo-won targeted a precise opening, directing one of his swords toward the man's head. In a single motion, the man twisted his head aside to evade the strike. At the same time, he contorted his arm behind his back, using his blade to intercept the second attack. The movement defied logic. Yo-won was momentarily caught off guard. The man had evaded and countered in the same instant, as though he possessed awareness beyond normal human limits. Frustration flared within the man as he cursed and prepared a counterattack. Stepping back, he unleashed a condensed storm of wind shaped like a blade. It surged forward at terrifying speed, closing the distance to Yo-won's throat in an instant before detonating with explosive force. The impact sent a shockwave through the surroundings. Yet when the dust settled, the man smirked as Yo-won remained unharmed. A faint smile touched Yo-won's lips as he acknowledged the man's monstrous instincts. He had never faced an opponent capable of reacting and adapting with such ferocity. From afar, the onlookers watched in disbelief. Hobum voiced his astonishment at the man's ability to contend with the Demon Lord, while Moonku reasoned that this could not be the god of the East, who was known to fight barehanded. Amid the tension, Yo-won made a decisive move. He sheathed the white dragon blade. The man in black paused, confused by the sudden change, questioning whether Yo-won was faltering. At that moment, a dark aura began to rise from his body. Black smoke coiled outward as the heavenly demon force manifested. The oppressive energy wrapped itself around the heavenly demon sword, growing denser with each passing moment. Yo-won declared that he would now fight with his full strength. A chilling presence spread across the mountain. Even the warriors of the demonic cult felt their nerves tighten under the weight of that power. Markham himself was shaken, feeling a cold shiver run through him as the overwhelming demonic chi pressed against his senses. The man stood frozen in bewilderment, realizing that Yo-won had not absorbed just a single mythical creature's essence core, but far more, pushing toward a realm beyond comprehension. Before his words could fully leave his mouth, Yo-won's figure vanished with a sharp sound and closed the distance instantly. The man sensed it immediately. Yo-won had grown faster, far beyond what he had been before. In hurried response, he tried to block, yet the hand gripping his longsword was violently knocked back. A flicker of confusion crossed him at that moment. Before he could recover, Yo-won moved in a strange and unexpected manner. Startled, the man attempted to strike back with the rebounding sword, but the motion came too late. A torrent of sky demon force surged forward like a roaring dragon, sweeping toward him with overwhelming force. As the man in black tried to evade, the energy had already reached him. Blood streaked across his body as the force carved into him repeatedly, and a cry of agony burst from his mouth. Watching the scene unfold, Chuninji muttered under his breath, recognizing the technique as the sword art of the demon god. Though it bore resemblance to the heavenly demon sword, the method of handling was distinctly different. Yo-won fixed his gaze on the man whose body had just been torn apart. Within his mind, he assessed the outcome. His initial strike had had failed, but the remaining 23 attacks had pierced through the man's vital points. Even with exceptional perception, avoiding such strikes would have been impossible. Having struck every critical point, the conclusion seemed certain. That thought abruptly halted. A vicious sensation surged from behind, and Yo-won turned sharply, startled by the intense killing intent. His eyes widened in disbelief. The bloodstains and wounds covering the man in black were vanishing at an astonishing rate, healing before his eyes. The sight was incomprehensible, and even the surrounding warriors of the cult could not conceal their shock at such regeneration. A low growl escaped the man as his body began to swell. His clothes stretched, then tore apart violently. The transformation resembled the blood reversion art, yet it was unmistakably different. Muscles expanded grotesquely, while the skeleton twisted and shifted, as though reshaping into something entirely new. From within, black hair-like strands began emerging from his body. Realizing the danger, Yo-won surged forward, understanding that he had to stop the transformation before it completed. Since even the demon god sword art had failed to kill him, he resolved to target the man's throat directly. At that precise moment, an overwhelming force pressed down upon his senses. Yo-won's instincts reacted instantly. He halted his strike mid-motion and retreated. A streak of light tore through the sky, and a man descended between them. The ground shattered beneath the impact, cracking and hollowing out from the sheer force of his arrival. It was the god of the east, Ark-Wui. Ark-Wui observed Yo-won, noting how he remained standing despite the immense pressure released upon arrival. Within his mind, a trace of surprise surfaced at Yo-won's endurance. Yo-won in turn sensed the same overwhelming presence. Deep within, he acknowledged the man's strength. Though he held no weapon, the energy emanating from the figure in the bamboo hat carried the unmistakable aura of a true martial master. Yo-won, who had momentarily paused, began to speak, attempting to confirm the identity of the man before him as the god of the east. Before he could finish, Ark-Wui moved. With a sharp motion, Ark-Wui extended his fist toward Yo-won. In that instant, an overwhelming surge of energy erupted from him, blasting forward like an explosion and crashing into Yo-won with devastating force. Dust surged into the air, obscuring the scene entirely. Unable to see through the thick cloud, the warriors of the demonic cult cried out in shock, their voices filled with alarm as they called out to their lord. Earlier, Ark-Wui had been rushing toward the immense energy he sensed from the north. Within his mind, he questioned how the opponent was still fighting, knowing the man's spiritual chi had already reached its peak and that he had spent 120 years mastering the finest martial arts of the East. Having faced him every 10 years, Ark-Wui understood his strength better than anyone. For such a man to be pushed this far by someone who should have long since died suggested that the opponent had also reached the pinnacle of the martial realm. A possibility surfaced deep within him, raising concern that a certain individual might have returned. With a sharp burst of movement, Ark-Wui arrived at the battlefield. He halted midair and focused his gaze on the two figures locked in combat. Upon observing them, he realized it was not the person he had feared. Instead, he assessed how a human could push such a formidable opponent so far. His attention sharpened as he sensed the ominous energy surrounding Yo-won, concluding that this power came from absorbing the spiritual chi of multiple mythical creatures. As Ark-Wui descended, he determined that if someone who had consumed such chi had entered Changbai Mountain, there could only be one reason: the pursuit of the Wind-White Tiger's essence core. That alone gave him reason to prevent the man from dying. He unleashed the Void Punch twice, yet the expected result did not follow. If the target had been struck properly, the energy should have wavered, but instead it surged stronger. From within the dust, a dark energy began to rise. Ark-Wui waved his hand to disperse the dust and reveal his opponent. As his vision cleared, he saw a single outstretched hand, behind which two immense invisible swords formed a barrier, blocking his attack like a shield. Astonishment surfaced within him, as it had been 20 years since anyone had managed to block his punch twice. He identified Yo-won's level, recognizing that he had reached the life and death realm. In response, Yo-won tightened his fist and acknowledged that Ark-Wui stood at the same realm. Yo-won observed him carefully, realizing that the man's martial skill was so refined that even his punch distorted time and space. It confirmed that Ark-Wui had indeed reached the life and death realm. Among the cultists, relieved murmurs spread as they confirmed confirmed that their lord was unharmed, though uncertainty lingered about the identity of the newcomer. Chun Inji, struck with realization, recognized the man as the god of the East. Dan Juchin's eyes widened at the existence of such a martial master, while Markham acknowledged that only the demon lord could stand against someone of that level. Deep within, Markham compared himself to Ark Woi, recognizing that despite standing in the mystic realm, he was incomparable to such overwhelming martial prowess. With Yo-Won bearing the title of Demon God, he understood that this confrontation was a clash between two beings who both carried the title of God. Sensing that Yo-Won was no ordinary opponent, Ark Woi raised his energy further. A heavy pressure descended instantly. The surrounding warriors staggered under the weight of it, the air itself turning suffocating as weaker fighters struggled to withstand the immense force. Yo-Won spoke, addressing the situation with cold clarity, noting that after being attacked twice in succession, it seemed there was no intention of conversation. Ark Woi was about to respond, but his attention shifted elsewhere. Beneath his foot, the man he had restrained let out a frustrated groan. Ark Woi stepped back, releasing him from the pressure. The man erupted in anger, cursing at the humiliation of being crushed. Ark Woi responded firmly, reminding him that he had been the one to attempt breaking the oath first and ordering him to return immediately. The man tried to comply, but his words were cut short as blood suddenly spilled from his mouth. At first, he assumed it was due to internal damage from being suppressed by Ark Woi, yet the truth was different. Though the 23 wounds inflicted upon him had completely regenerated, a lingering pain throbbed through the areas that had been struck. Fixing his gaze on Yo-Won, he growled, realizing that Yo-Won had absorbed the essence core of a tainted mythical creature. Yo-Won frowned at the unfamiliar term, questioning its meaning. The man reacted with fury, stepping forward as if to confront him, but Ark Woi halted him by gripping his shoulder. Ark Woi commanded him to stop. The man responded with a threat, warning that if the hand remained on his shoulder, he would sever the fingers without hesitation. Unshaken, Ark Woi warned him that losing control would mean breaking the oath, questioning whether he truly intended to disregard it. With a rough motion, the man shook off Ark Woi's hand and forced himself to suppress his anger. He declared his intent to kill before casting one last glare at Yo-Won and turning toward Changbai Mountain. Yo-Won did not allow him to leave. At that moment, a chilling force spread across the ground like rippling waves. Yin energy surged outward, freezing the surface instantly. From the frozen earth, a massive block of ice rose, cutting off the man's path. Yo-Won's voice carried a cold finality as he made it clear that escape would not be permitted. The man's eyes, barely restrained until now, burned red with anger. He mocked the obstruction, recognizing it as ice, and immediately drew his sword to strike it. The blade collided with the surface, yet instead of shattering, the ice held firm. The impact rebounded, sending the sword back. Within his mind, he struggled to comprehend it. Despite Yo-Won having absorbed an essence core, the power displayed now seemed beyond that of a human. He realized that without transforming his body, he would not be able to awaken fully. At the same time, the earlier attack continued to interfere with the flow of his chi, disrupting his control. A destructive impulse surfaced, weighing whether he should forcefully break through and annihilate everything in his path. In response, Yo-Won released the invisible sword once more, reinforcing his earlier resolve that the man would not be allowed to leave. The invisible sword shot toward the man with a sharp whistling force. Yet what followed left Yo-Won stunned. Ark Woi intercepted it with his bare fist, stopping the attack completely and absorbing its energy. The moment did not end there. With a powerful motion, the man drove the sword's force into the ground, causing the earth to split apart with a violent crack. In that brief instant, Yo-Won grasped the principle behind the ice. Its rigidity could only be maintained if yin energy continued to flow into it without interruption. Ark Woi urged the man to leave quickly. Clicking his tongue in irritation, the man in black stepped onto the ice and launched himself away. Yo-Won immediately moved to stop him. With a single motion of his hand, countless ice swords formed in the air. Just as he prepared to unleash them, Ark Woi stepped in once more, extending his fist toward Yo-Won. The air itself tore apart with a sharp explosion. Yo-Won's eyes widened. What appeared to be a simple punch carried something far greater. Within that strike, he perceived a flawless culmination. Countless punches unified into a single trajectory. All unnecessary motion had been eliminated. Every ounce of power compressed into one devastating blow. The force within it resembled a volcano on the verge of eruption. It was a perfected technique, one that no master of the life and death realm could easily react to at such close range. Yet Yo-Won responded. responded. A ferocious, black, invisible sword manifested in his hand as all 24 forms of the sword art of the demon god converged into a single point. In that instant, Ark Wui recognized it. The level of unification he had spent decades achieving was already being executed by the young man before him. Their attacks collided. The impact exploded outward like a sonic boom, shaking the entire area. The aftermath alone was enough to hurl the members of the demonic cult away, their bodies thrown back by the overwhelming force. Some were sent flying as the sheer power of the clash surpassed anything they could withstand. As the dust settled, a massive crater with a radius of 5 feet marked the point of impact. The cultists, shaken, immediately looked toward Yo-Won, searching for any sign of injury. A faint haze of energy rose from Yo-Won's upper body, dispersing the remnants of Ark Wui's force. A similar haze emerged from Ark Wui's chest, blood traced down from his lips, revealing that even he had suffered internal damage. Calmly, he wiped it away with his sleeve. All of it had occurred within a fleeting exchange. As Yo-Won's sword struck toward him, Ark Wui had attempted to counter with a kick aimed at Yo-Won's right shoulder. Yo-Won evaded the strike and drove his own attack into Ark Wui's upper body. At the moment Ark Wui's punch connected, he had expected Yo-Won to be blown away. Instead, a chilling sensation spread through his fist. In that brief hesitation, Yo-Won's sword pierced into his chest, forcing him back 10 steps. Within his mind, Ark Wui assessed the exchange, recognizing that Yo-Won's energy was beyond comprehension, difficult to suppress, and even harder to push back. Yo-Won observed Ark Wui with sharp focus. Within his mind, he assessed that although his true chi surpassed Ark Wui's in quality, the force behind Ark Wui's attacks was greater. Even without relying on an essence core, Ark Wui had reached an extraordinary level of strength. Despite being his opponent, Yo-Won acknowledged the man's ability as remarkable. The unification of all 24 forms of the heavenly demon sword art, originally created as the ultimate technique based on the life and death realm, had taken immense mastery. Yet Ark Wui not only achieved a similar unification of his own techniques, but could also adjust it freely at will. Ark Wui spoke, expressing that it had been a long time since he had experienced such a proper fight. Clenching his fists, he released his energy fully, declaring that it would be an insult not to give everything against an opponent of this caliber. He acknowledged Yo-Won as a worthy adversary, no longer an unwelcome intruder, and revealed that it had been decades since he had been pushed to use the Zenith Martial Void Fist. Yo-Won responded in kind. As his words settled, the space around him trembled, and his energy began to condense rapidly. In an instant, 3 invisible swords manifested, each imbued with lightning, fire, and ice. A frown formed on Yo-Won's face as he warned that even a single lapse in guard would mean death. There was no falsehood in that warning. Within his thoughts, Ark Wui realized that both of them had been concealing their true strength until now. His eyes sharpened with tension as he observed the 3 attribute-infused swords raging with power. He understood that what Yo-Won had shown earlier had not been his full capability. Although he had already suspected the absorption of multiple essence cores, witnessing the control of such different types of true chi within a single body exceeded expectation. From afar, Chun-Inji gazed at the scene in awe. Within his mind, he recognized that the heavenly demonic chi served as the core, maintaining balance among the different energies. He understood that this duel would determine the strongest martial artist and silently urged Yo-Won to remain cautious. Yo-Won continued to observe Ark Wui, noting that once he had settled into his stance, no weaknesses or openings could be found. His offense and defense were perfectly balanced. At the same time, Ark Wui's thoughts deepened. It had been a long time since he had felt such tension. He had never witnessed someone imbue a formless sword with elemental true chi in this manner, and when combined with the ominous black energy, the pressure became even more overwhelming. If Yo-Won could control all 3 swords simultaneously with precision, it would be equivalent to facing 3 masters at once. Reaching a conclusion, Ark Wui resolved to close the distance. With a sudden burst, he stepped forward. As his fist rose, the surrounding space twisted and a powerful force surged forth. At the same time, the air itself seemed to bend under his control, forming a crushing pressure that struck toward Yo-Won like a raging wind. Yo-Won recognized the nature of the attack. With a subtle motion of his right hand, the invisible sword infused with black ice, chi rotated into place, forming a barrier that shielded him from the incoming storm. Yo-won extended his left hand forward, and the black lightning chi sword shot straight through the center of the raging wind, advancing toward the god of the east with a crackling force. Within his mind, Yo-won discerned the truth. The wind was merely a veil concealing the true power of the incoming punch. Focusing only on the wind would leave his chest exposed to a direct strike. Arc-Wee realized his intent had been seen through. As the tactic failed, he shifted immediately, drawing his left hand in a circular motion. The surrounding space twisted, intercepting the incoming lightning chi sword. With a sharp impact, the sword halted. It was not erased nor dispersed. It simply ceased its advance, restrained by the distorted space itself. Seeing that the feared outcome had not occurred, Arc-Wee felt a brief sense of relief and prepared to strike again. In that very moment, the halted lightning chi sword surged forward once more. Caught off guard, Arc-Wee stepped in and forced the ground to rise. Fragments of earth shattered upward, forming a barrier that intercepted the blade. Yet the collision sent debris flying back at him, forcing him to retreat several steps. Within his mind, doubt surfaced as he questioned whether such swords could truly be stopped. Before he could fully react, another threat descended. From above, the invisible black flame sword came crashing down. It moved with a refined and deliberate trajectory, unfolding the sword art of the demon god as it advanced. The motion was precise and relentless, beyond what could be countered through simple spatial distortion. Arc-Wee responded by unleashing the Zenith Martial Void Fist. His arms moved fluidly, and an invisible circle formed within the space his hands traced, recreating the essence of his technique. The moment the black flame sword collided with it, a violent eruption followed. The clash tore through the surroundings, the force of just two techniques ravaging the battlefield. Arc-Wee was driven back several steps. At the same time, Yo-won felt a sharp pain surge through his hands. Within his mind, he analyzed the exchange, recognizing that Arc-Wee had drawn in the force of the formless fist, breaking through the formless sword and reversing the flow of energy itself. Without hesitation, Yo-won summoned more power. Once again, invisible swords of black lightning chi and black flame chi formed around him. His internal energy remained abundant, flowing without signs of depletion. In contrast, Arc-Wee's condition began to show. Sweat dripped from his forehead and his arms trembled under the strain. Within, he assessed the situation with urgency. Though capable of producing equal force, his reserves of true chi were insufficient. Yo-won continued to sustain three formless swords without exhaustion, resembling a mythical creature more than a human. Realizing the imbalance, Arc-Wee resolved to take a risk. If each elemental formless sword matched the output of a concentrated formless fist, then breaking through all three at once and delivering the ultimate strike of the Zenith Martial Void Fist was the only path forward. Even if it meant enduring the reversal of energy multiple times, it was a necessary gamble. Having made his decision, he acted. With a sudden burst, Arc-Wee thrust his arm forward in a decisive strike. Yet Yo-won did not move. Seeing Yo-won remain still even as the distance closed, Arc-Wee felt confusion rise within him. He found it strange that Yo-won made no move despite allowing him to come this close. Unable to discern his opponent's intent, he concluded that the closer he got, the greater his advantage would become. At such range, he could unleash the ultimate move of the Zenith Martial Void Fist with minimal damage to himself. That thought held until Yo-won spoke. Yo-won stated that through this exchange, he had gained something valuable. A brief flicker of confusion crossed Arc-Wee's mind. In the next instant, the three swords shifted, all aiming directly at him. His eyes trembled as he realized what was about to unfold. Yo-won, who had been in the process of unifying the 24 forms into a single point, was now attempting to perfect that very unification through an attribute-infused invisible sword. The space around Yo-won began to tremble violently. A terrifying concentration of energy gathered into a single point, strong enough to shake the very earth. Arc-Wee, who had been advancing to strike, was forced to abandon his attack and turn entirely toward defense. Within his mind, urgency surged as he recognized that he had to avoid the incoming strike. He understood clearly that this sword could no longer be stopped. Arc-Wee clenched his right fist, forcing out the Martial Void Fist in an attempt to withstand the impact. As his fist rose, space itself trembled, sending ripples across the ground. The collision followed instantly, and the lightning chi sword struck. Blood burst from Arc Wui's mouth as the overwhelming energy crashed into him. The force contained within the sword far exceeded his own, inflicting immediate damage. He realized that if he continued to endure it directly, he would be consumed and destroyed. Within his mind, the impossibility of the situation became clear. Summoning all his strength, he forced his fist upward, generating powerful ripples that strained against the attack. The cost was severe. His bones and muscles twisted under the pressure, making even the act of raising his arm agonizing. Yet through that sacrifice, the trajectory of the lightning chi sword shifted, deflecting upward. The redirected strike surged past him and slammed into the mountain peak behind. The mountain split as lightning tore through it, carving a massive hole while rocks cascaded down. Witnessing the aftermath, the cultists were left in stunned silence at the sheer destructive force. Arc Wui, having narrowly escaped, grabbed his right shoulder and forcibly twisted it back into place, breathing heavily. His body had endured something beyond what should have been possible for a human. His gaze trembled as it locked onto Yowon. Before him, Yowon stood poised, the invisible black flame chi sword and the black ice chi sword still aimed directly at him. Yowon acknowledged Arc Wui's strength, yet made it clear that the attack would continue. He declared that he would unleash the remaining swords in the same manner. At those words, Arc Wui's expression paled, fully understanding the danger that was about to descend upon him once again. Yowon observed Arc Wui in silence. Within his mind, he measured the cost of his last attack, realizing that more than a third of his true chi had already been consumed. Though he maintained his composure, he wished for the battle to end here. He did not want to take the life of a man who had reached such heights in martial arts purely through his own effort. Recognizing the situation, Arc Wui conceded. He admitted defeat, acknowledging that the younger generation had surpassed the old, and that Yowon's strength exceeded even that of the former cult leader, Chun Mahjong. A trace of confusion appeared on Yowon's face at the unfamiliar name. Not far away, Chun Inji's eyes widened as he heard those words. Within his thoughts, he questioned whether Arc Wui had known his father, and wondered just how long the man had lived. Yowon analyzed further, realizing that Arc Wui belonged to the same era as his great-grandfather. That alone explained the depth and refinement embedded within his martial arts. Yet despite conceding, Arc Wui did not seem entirely willing to step aside, as though he still intended to prevent entry into Changbai Mountain. Yowon questioned the reason behind such determination. He asked directly whether Arc Wui had known his great-grandfather. Arc Wui clarified that they had only crossed paths in battle a few times. Accepting that as sufficient connection, Yowon shifted the topic, asking why Arc Wui was trying to stop them from entering the mountain. Arc Wui explained that within Changbai Mountain resided a being far beyond what ordinary people could handle, and that he had taken it upon himself to guard the place to prevent that entity from reaching others. At those words, understanding surfaced within Yowon. The account given by Zen Master Wu Chun had been true. He questioned whether Arc Wui was referring to the man from earlier. Arc Wui confirmed it, describing the entity as extremely dangerous, one that had lived for a long time, festering in rage and hatred. Yowon noted that Arc Wui referred to it as a being, concluding that it was not human. A realization struck Arc Wui as well, recognizing that Yowon had likely deduced this through direct confrontation. Yowon questioned further, pointing out that if the purpose was to prevent harm to others, then that threat did not seem capable of harming him. Within his mind, Arc Wui acknowledged the truth in those words. Yowon was different. Even before the transformation, Yowon had held the upper hand. He was not someone who required protection. Arc Wui reflected on the long years he had spent guarding the mountain, hoping that the creature's rage and hatred would fade with time. Yet Feng Bo, the white tiger, had not changed at all. He foresaw the inevitable. Once his own strength declined and the oath binding them came to an end, the creature would unleash a massacre upon Zhongyuan. Memories surfaced, tied to Sakyung, his old companion. Considering that bond, the only mercy left would be to end Feng Bo himself. Yet even that had become impossible. The time of their 10-year oath was approaching, and his injured right arm would not recover in time. Though he could attempt one final effort by pushing himself to the limit, the risk remained immense. If even the slightest misstep occurred, the creature would escape Changbai Mountain. Arc Wui questioned whether Yo-Won's goal was also the essence core of the mythical creature. Yo-Won answered without hesitation, making it clear that there was no other reason. Arc Wui found the response unexpected. Others had always hidden their intentions behind excuses, yet Yo-Won openly revealed his greed. He pointed out that there should be no one stronger than Yo-Won and Murim, and questioned why he still sought such a power. Within his mind, Yo-Won considered the truth, that his aim was to prevent the Berserk Saber God from attaining immortality, but understood it would not be easily believed. Deciding to reveal only the essential part, he began explaining that a sect known as the Berserk Saber of Six Martial Arts had recently emerged in Zhongyun, and that its leader sought immortality through such means. Before he could finish, a thunderous roar interrupted everything. The sound echoed from the direction of Changbai Mountain. Arc Wui's expression changed instantly as he turned toward it. At the mountain's peak, a vast lake churned violently, sending a towering column of water into the sky. A ferocious tiger's roar followed, shaking the surroundings. Yo-Won narrowed his eyes, recognizing that the sound could not have come from any human. It had to be the white tiger. Arc Wui realized what had happened. The oath had been broken. Without offering further explanation, he moved at once, urgency driving his actions. Within his mind, he understood that the peak of the mountain was where the creature resided, and that roar signified the very outcome he had feared. As he rushed forward, Yo-Won followed closely, questioning whether the roar had come from the white tiger. Arc Wui confirmed it with a nod. Yo-Won concluded that the Berserk Saber of Six Martial Arts sect must have reached the creature while they had been engaged in battle. Arc Wui acknowledged this, recalling that the Orthodox Mirim Alliance had mentioned such a group. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he insisted that they had to stop them immediately. Yo-Won agreed, recognizing that it would be extremely dangerous if the sect obtained the Wind White Tiger's essence core. Arc Wui, however, spoke with a grave urgency, emphasizing that the greater danger was not the loss of the essence core, but the possibility of the creature returning to its original form. Yo-Won pondered this, questioning why Arc Wui showed no concern over the essence core itself. It seemed likely that Arc Wui did not fully understand the threat posed by the Berserk Saber sect, whose power could easily lead them to seize it. At that moment, a deep, ominous vibration spread through the air. Yo-Won looked toward Changbai Mountain, his eyes trembling. The previously clear sky had been consumed in an instant by dark, gathering clouds. Arc Wui revealed the truth. The creature had lived for nearly 1,000 years and had become corrupted just before ascending to the heavens. It was not something that could ever be allowed to roam free in the world. A suffocating, dreadful energy engulfed the entire mountain. Above the peak of Changbai Mountain, beneath the swirling darkness of the clouds, a massive and infinitely dark tiger began to take form, its presence alone radiating a monstrous aura that defied comprehension. Feng Bo, the white tiger, was one of the 5 spirit beasts. Among them, it was the only one whose habitat was known, said to reside in the east at Changbai Mountain, as recorded in one of the 3 great books. No one knew how long these 5 spirits had existed, or how they had first appeared. What was known, however, was that they possessed extraordinarily long lifespans and would ascend to the heavens once their spiritual power reached its peak. With a sharp rush of movement, the demon god and the god of the east sped through the forest near the mountain's entrance. Yo-Won questioned whether this ascension to heaven was literal. Arc Wui confirmed it with a nod. Yo-Won then noted the contradiction. Despite such a divine nature, the energy surrounding the creature felt overwhelmingly dark. Arc Wui explained that the corruption stemmed from failure. Unable to ascend, the creature had succumbed to its own rage and hatred. Within his mind, Arc Wui recalled the moment vividly. The day the mythical beast of Changbai Mountain roared in fury, transforming into a monstrous existence capable of bringing destruction upon the world. Yo-Won, reflecting deeply, recognized a parallel from his own experience. When he had first obtained the heavenly demon sword, he had witnessed a vision, one he believed to be of his ancestor, transforming into a dragon and severing the horns of an Amugi on the verge of ascension. At the time, he had dismissed it as nothing more than a shift in color, but now he understood it differently. That Amugi, once pure white, had turned dark. Much like the corrupted being before them, it had undergone the same descent, yet even such a creature had been overwhelmed by his ancestor, who had severed dozens of its heads in a single strike. The level of martial prowess displayed in that memory felt nothing short of divine. Breaking free from those thoughts, Yo-Won asked whether the Wind-White Tiger had also been interrupted during its ascension. Arc-Wui flinched at the question but offered no reply, continuing forward in silence. Observing this, Yo-Won understood that the matter ran deep and chose not to press further. After a moment, Arc-Wui spoke. He revealed that the creature had lost its most important friend 100 years ago. Yo-Won questioned this, surprised by the notion. Arc-Wui confirmed it, explaining that the friend had also been someone he knew well, an extraordinary individual, a man remarkable enough to form a bond even with the guardian god of Changbai Mountain. Within his tone lay quiet regret as he reflected that had that man not died in such a manner, none of the current tragedy would have come to pass. Within his mind, Arc-Wui questioned the sudden change. For 100 years, the oath had remained unbroken, yet now the creature had returned to its original form. He could not understand what had provoked such a transformation, though a troubling possibility began to form. Earlier at the peak of the mountain, the vast lake that once reflected the sky had been swallowed by dark clouds. The winds churned violently, sending waves crashing across its surface. Among the Berserk Saber sect, one of the elders observed the disturbance to the north, noting that a great battle was taking place and that they should seize the opportunity. Hwang Heol directed the group forward, pointing out a location near the peak where spiritual chi was especially dense. As they approached, he remarked on the enormity of the lake and understood why the eastern lands regarded the mountain as sacred. He ordered his warriors to spread out and search, explaining that the Wind-White Tiger, said to be 3 times larger than an ordinary tiger, would not be difficult to locate. The warriors moved as instructed. In the distance, they noticed a lone figure seated in meditation. Observing the circulation of chi around him, they assumed he was injured. Before they could act further, the figure vanished. Confusion spread among them as they searched their surroundings, only for the man to reappear instantly before their eyes. Shock overtook them. The figure was Feng Bo, the White Tiger. Rage radiated from him as he condemned their intrusion into his mountain. In a single motion, he struck, tearing through them with overwhelming force. Bodies were split apart as his fury erupted, and his killing intent surged uncontrollably. From a distance, Hwang Heol watched in disbelief at the sudden chaos. He rushed forward, calling for the left supreme and right supreme as the situation spiraled out of control. The plains were engulfed by violent winds as Feng Bo cut down everyone in his path. A twisted delight appeared within him as he challenged them, mocking their reliance on numbers and urging them to bring all their forces, declaring that he would tear them apart. Amid the chaos, confusion spread among the sect's warriors. They could not understand his words, nor recognize the origin of his technique. The blade art he displayed was unlike anything they had ever seen. Hwang Heol observed closely, realizing that Feng Bo's technique rivaled even the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts. He had believed that only the god of the East resided here as a martial master, yet this existence far exceeded expectations. Recognizing the growing danger, the left supreme drew his blade, deciding that if nothing was done, everyone would be slaughtered. He resolved to confront Feng Bo personally. As he charged forward, Hwang Heol called out to him, but the right supreme intervened, expressing confidence that the left supreme's mastery of the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts surpassed his own. Feng Bo's instincts flared, and he turned sharply toward the incoming strike. The left supreme's blade descended, charged with chi, but Feng Bo met it head on, blocking it with his own sword. The left supreme attempted to restrain him, urging him to calm down. Feng Bo responded with a twisted grin, his rage evident as he mocked him. Without hesitation, the left supreme leaped high into the air and launched a flying kick. The strike landed squarely on Feng Bo's chest, sending him hurtling back toward the Heaven Lake. Yet even in retreat, Feng Bo regained control, halting his momentum mid-drag. Fury surged within him. Within his mind, he resolved that the one who had dared to strike him would be torn apart. The left supreme, unable to understand Feng Bo's words, felt an inexplicable irritation rise within himself. Declaring his intent, he ordered the others to stay back and rushed forward once more, excitement building within him. He found the situation strangely exhilarating. The opponent's blade was unusual, and every movement carried the weight of an ultimate technique. The encounter intrigued him deeply. As he advanced, Feng Bo flinched, recognizing the pattern within the left supreme's blade techniques. In response, he swung his sword, empowered by wind, forcing the left Supreme to retreat instantly. The sudden halt confused the left Supreme, who questioned why Feng Bo had stopped. Feng Bo released his grip on the sword, realization dawning within him. He recognized the technique. It was the same as before, the same people. The left Supreme grew increasingly frustrated, unable to comprehend his words. Then Feng Bo roared. His eyes turned a deep crimson as his fury exploded outward. The roar alone shook the surroundings, forcing nearby warriors to clutch their ears as a crushing pressure spread through their bodies. Their stomachs churned under the sheer force of it, and the left Supreme was thrown back violently. His left arm was torn apart and a scream of agony escaped him. Huang Heol rushed to his side, alarmed, but the left Supreme could only respond in pain, making it clear that losing an arm left no room for reassurance. The warriors of the Berserk Saber watched in disarray as the situation spiraled beyond control. Feng Bo roared once more, and his form began to change. Before their eyes, he transformed into a colossal tiger, an overwhelming, monstrous existence capable of annihilating them entirely. The right Supreme stood bewildered, unable to comprehend how a human could turn into such a creature. The left Supreme, despite his injuries, rebuked him, making it clear that the truth should have been obvious. Horror spread across Huang Heol's face as he watched the scene unfold. The mere sound of the creature's cry was enough to bring warriors to their knees. Panic set in as he struggled to comprehend the situation, questioning whether this monstrous being was truly the wind-white tiger they had come seeking. The creature before them towered at nearly 90 meters. Though it bore the form of a tiger, its crimson eyes and overwhelming, ferocious aura made it something entirely different from the white tiger described in legend. The warriors unleashed volleys of projectile chi toward Feng Bo. As the attack struck, the beast flinched and turned its gaze upon them. Seeing a reaction, one of the leaders commanded an all-out assault, believing that its immense size would hinder its movements. Before the command could even be completed, Feng Bo roared. With a single swipe of his claws, he tore through the attacking warriors. Dozens were carved apart instantly, blood scattering across the battlefield. Within his mind, Huang Heol struggled to accept what he had just witnessed. The scale of destruction far exceeded anything martial arts could contend with. This was no longer a battle. It was a catastrophe. The sky itself began to change. Dark clouds gathered around Feng Bo, and a dense mist formed, spiraling rapidly until it became a massive tornado. The winds howled violently, sweeping through the battlefield with devastating force. Cries of agony echoed as hundreds were caught within the storm, their bodies torn apart or flung away to their deaths. The left Supreme stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend how even the wind itself had become lethally sharp. The right Supreme, equally shaken, acknowledged the overwhelming difficulty of facing such a being. Another roar erupted from Feng Bo, sending masters and warriors scattering in all directions in a desperate attempt to survive. The right Supreme, still shaken, admitted that even the creature's cries alone sent chills through him, questioning whether there was any method to kill such a monster. The left Supreme, despite his grievous injury, responded harshly, his frustration evident. Amid the chaos, Huang Heol remained lost in thought, overwhelmed by the sheer power before him. This was nothing like their previous battles. It existed on an entirely different level. Then a new presence appeared. A voice remarked upon the fallen mythical creature, recognizing it as something rarely seen. The warriors turned in shock as their leader arrived, wearing a bamboo hat. All of them bowed instantly, surprised by his sudden arrival. Though he had previously stated that he would deal with the Orthodox faction before joining them, he had appeared far sooner than expected. The right Supreme quickly sought his guidance, asking how they should deal with the monster. The Blade Lord gave a simple command. No one was to act. He would handle it alone. Before anyone could question him, he moved. With a swift motion, he ascended into the air, flying toward the raging tornadoes that surrounded Feng Bo. A vast surge of invisible energy rose as the Blade Lord brought his hand down, slicing through the raging tornadoes in a single motion. The watching warriors erupted in cheers, believing the storm had been cut apart. Without hesitation, the Blade Lord drew his sword and leaped forward, aiming directly for Feng Bo's chest. At his approach, Feng Bo roared and raised its massive front paw to strike. In that instant, the space around the Blade Lord's sword trembled, the weapon carrying an immense concentrated force. Part of Feng Bo's paw struck the blade and was repelled, only to be severed moments later. The beast let out a roar of pain as its limb was cut cleanly away. A fierce grin spread across the Blade Lord's face. Within his mind, he recognized the technique he had once been shown, the unification of internal energy energy demonstrated by the god of the East 20 years prior. Now, he sought to claim victory through it. Seizing the moment, he pressed forward, aiming to sever Feng Bo's neck in one decisive strike. Before he could complete it, Feng Bo unleashed a deafening roar. From its mouth burst a violent torrent of wind, powerful enough to cleave through mountains. The overwhelming force struck the Blade Lord head on, driving him downward into the depths of the lake. The onlookers cried out in alarm as he disappeared beneath the surface. Feng Bo raised its remaining front paw and slammed it into the lake. The already turbulent waters began to freeze rapidly under the influence of its power. As the cold spread upward, Feng Bo lifted its paw, shattering the forming ice. At that very moment, the Blade Lord surged back out of the lake. Two invisible swords infused with ice chi formed instantly in the air and shot toward Feng Bo. With cold intent, the Blade Lord declared his aim to claim the creature's essence core. The blades pierced into Feng Bo's chest. As they struck, Feng Bo roared violently, releasing its energy in an attempt to repel them. Though the external force was deflected, the ice chi that had already entered its body began to spread from within. The beast howled in pain, its massive form twisting as it lashed out with its claws. The backlash struck the Blade Lord, throwing him away with force. Blood spilled from the corner of his lips as he absorbed the impact. Despite the injury, his condition recovered quickly. Having absorbed an essence core himself, he was able to endure the damage, his expression stabilizing as he regained control. He acknowledged the resistance before him, recognizing the creature's defiance. Even so, he understood that had Feng Bo exerted slightly more power in that moment, the outcome could have been far worse for him. The moment the Blade Lord prepared to move again and strike, a sudden shift occurred. From the north, an immense surge of energy erupted. It merged with the raging tornado and shot forward, piercing straight through Feng Bo's chest as the creature writhed under the spreading ice chi. A violent impact followed. A ray of black lightning tore through Feng Bo's body and vanished beyond it, leaving devastation in its wake. The beast convulsed in agony, shattering the frozen lake as fragments of ice exploded outward in all directions. Confusion spread across the battlefield as no one could comprehend what had just occurred. Then their attention shifted. From the gaping wound in Feng Bo's chest, something shone brilliantly. The realization struck all at once. It was the core. Yet even as they recognized it, uncertainty lingered over the mysterious lightning strike that had revealed it. The Blade Lord immediately shouted, commanding his subordinates to secure the core without delay. But they were too late. From within the open chest, their gazes followed the movement of a figure clad in black armor. The figure reached into the wound and seized the core. As the helmet dissolved away, long hair flowed freely in the wind and rain, revealing the man beneath. Recognition struck instantly, and Huang Heol shouted in shock, identifying him as the demon god. The two supremes stood stunned, unable to process the sudden appearance of such a figure. Yo-Won stood there, calm and composed, the core now in his possession. A faint smile appeared as he addressed the silent battlefield, acknowledging their efforts. From afar, the Blade Lord's expression twisted with fury. A short while earlier, Arkwui had spoken with solemn resolve. He revealed that he had spent nearly a century attempting to purify the creature, hoping it might ascend according to the will of light, yet that possibility had vanished. Now that the creature had cast aside the restraint of their covenant and returned to its true form, it would inevitably bring devastation upon the Central Plains, just as the six-headed dragon turtle had done in ancient times. Originally, the responsibility to prevent such destruction had been his alone, but if it could no longer be contained, he entrusted that duty to Yo-Won, asking him to end the creature with his own hands. Yo-Won questioned whether he would regret such a decision. Arkwui answered with clarity. Though he had held the creature back for 100 years out of both affection and duty, he could not allow that attachment to endanger countless innocent lives. Within his mind, Yo-Won reflected on those words. Those who held power often placed the safety of the innocent second, yet Arkwui, despite possessing unmatched strength, chose to sever a century of attachment without hesitation to prevent indiscriminate slaughter. It was the resolve of a true man of chivalry, far beyond the shallow justice often proclaimed by others. Accepting that resolve, Yo-Won agreed. Understanding the urgency of the situation, he declared that if he were to grant that request, then they would have to act without delay. Arkwui glanced at Yo-Won, questioning within his mind how his lightning technique, which at full power rivaled his own, would be used in what was about to unfold. In that moment, something began to form around Yo-Won, A dark presence gathered, wrapping around his body as black armor materialized. Arc Wui's eyes widened at the sight. Without further explanation, Yo-Won stated that he would move ahead. Before Arc Wui could respond, a low vibration spread from the armor. Smoke surged from beneath his feet, propelling him upward in an instant. He shot into the sky, leaving Arc Wui momentarily stunned as he tried to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Yo-Won soared toward the peak and quickly took in the battlefield. There, he saw a man locked in combat with Feng Bo, someone who wielded his power with precision, focusing immense energy into a single point, much like the god of the East. This man also possessed the ability to freeze the lake itself, a clear sign that he had absorbed the core of the Great Pang. Within his mind, Yo-Won identified him as the Blade Lord, recalling the words of his grandfather, that the leader of the Berserk Saber of Six Martial Arts sect had journeyed to the Patala Palace to claim that very core. Now, having already obtained one, the man had set his sights on the Wind White Tiger's essence core as well. Yo-Won issued a command to NANO, ordering it to locate the point within Feng Bo's body where spiritual power was most concentrated. NANO responded immediately, identifying the chest area near the neck as the focal point. With that information, Yo-Won formed his plan. Intervening prematurely would only entangle him in the clash between Feng Bo and the Blade Lord. Instead, he would wait for the moment when the creature had been weakened. And that moment had arrived. His plan unfolded perfectly. As Yo-Won approached, he saw the core glowing brilliantly within Feng Bo's exposed chest. Even without touching it, he could sense the immense energy contained within. Looking at the fallen beast, he understood the severity of what he was about to do. For a martial artist, losing such a core would be akin to having one's Dantian destroyed, yet allowing it to fall into the hands of the others would be far worse. Without hesitation, he seized it. Floating in the air with the core in his grasp, Yo-Won drew the attention of everyone below. Hwang Heol, overcome with anger, shouted at him, condemning his actions as dishonorable and accusing him of resorting to cowardly means. The Supremes, however, reacted differently. They had witnessed the Blade Lord's repeated attempts fail to penetrate Feng Bo's body, yet Yo-Won had succeeded where even he could not. The Right Supreme acknowledged him as something beyond expectation, a figure even more monstrous than rumored. The Left Supreme, despite his reluctance, admitted that aside from the Blade Lord, no one present could stand against such a being. Hwang Heol cut through their words, insisting that regardless of the odds, Yo-Won had to be killed. According to records left behind by an unknown figure, his existence could not be allowed to continue. Above them, the Blade Lord's fury erupted. His voice rang out as he fixed his gaze upon Yo-Won, seething with rage at the one who had taken what he sought. The Blade Lord feigned a casual motion of his hand. In the next instant, invisible energy gathered before him, sharp and lethal, surging forward with the force to cleave Yo-Won in half. The attack struck, but it was stopped. An invisible sword manifested in midair, intercepting the blow. The collision sent violent pressure rippling outward, throwing nearby warriors away and forcing others to retreat from the impact zone. Without warning, the Blade Lord appeared directly before Yo-Won in the air, demanding the core. Yo-Won regarded him with a hint of confusion, questioning his identity. The Blade Lord responded with a low laugh, implying that such recognition should have been obvious. Then he advanced. Unleashing the fifth form of the extreme art of the Blade God, he declared himself the one who stood at the pinnacle of all blades. Invisible, razor-sharp strikes erupted toward Yo-Won in rapid succession. Yo-Won moved only slightly, observing the technique with precision. Within his mind, he recognized that the Blade Lord had achieved extreme killing speed without even relying on a drawing technique. The claim of standing at the pinnacle of blade mastery was not exaggerated. In response, Yo-Won's invisible sword expanded into a dense net, intercepting every incoming strike, even as he held the core. The Blade Lord reacted with fury, realizing that Yo-Won was using the core itself as a shield. Redirecting his attack, he aimed directly for Yo-Won's neck. At the very moment the strike neared its mark, he abruptly retreated. A streak of blue light crashed down where he had just been. An ice sword, glowing with a cold blue hue, floated in the air. The Blade Lord's expression shifted to shock as he observed it. Within his mind, he compared it to his own ability. Though he could create ice swords using the yin energy of the Great Pang, he lacked the confidence to sustain such a dense and enduring form. A grin spread across his face, not of mockery, but of exhilaration. It had been 20 years since he had encountered a master of such caliber. Precisely because of that, he could not allow Yo-won to take the core. He raised his yin energy. The temperature around them plummeted instantly. Frost spread across the ground, and even falling raindrops froze mid-air before shattering as they hit the surface. The Blade Lord laughed, declaring that even without enhanced energy, he could still manifest ice swords. The frozen raindrops turned into countless projectiles, all converging toward Yo-won, yet just before they struck, they halted. The Blade Lord frowned, sensing something unnatural. Yo-won had taken control. With a single motion of his hand, Yo-won reversed their direction. The suspended ice shifted and shot back toward the Blade Lord. A flicker of disbelief crossed his mind as he struggled to comprehend how such control was possible. He leaped upward to evade, dismissing the attack as mere ice. In midair, he formed an invisible sword and swung it downward, shattering the incoming projectiles into fragments. The Blade Lord dismissed the exchange, declaring that such tricks held no meaning against him. Yet as he focused on dispersing the frozen rain, countless ice swords, glowing with a deep blue hue, formed around him from every direction. Yo-won spoke with calm confidence, revealing that the Heaven Flash was not merely a wide area technique. In an instant, the swords closed in. The Blade Lord's eyes trembled as he saw the attack converging without a single gap. Surrounded completely, he reacted with fury. Focusing intensely, he chose to unify his energy. The space around him warped, ripples spreading outward as beams of light surged toward him and were drawn into his body, vanishing as they were absorbed. With that, the incoming assault was halted. Yo-won was visibly surprised. The method bore striking similarity to Arc Wui's technique, yet this opponent posed an even greater challenge. Having absorbed the core of the Great Peng, the Blade Lord could manipulate and absorb Ice Chi itself, making him far more difficult to overwhelm. From a distance, the Supremes watched in disbelief. The scale of the battle surpassed anything they had ever witnessed. The realization spread. Both combatants were monsters in their own right. Yet amidst the clash, another force intervened. Feng Bo roared again. The sound alone ruptured eardrums and shook the battlefield. Despite losing its core, the creature did not collapse. Instead, its fury intensified, its crimson eyes blazing with even greater rage. The Blade Lord frowned at the development. Feng Bo's gaze locked onto Yo-won, the one who now held its core. A moment of disbelief surfaced within him as he questioned how the creature still stood. At that precise moment, both Yo-won and the Blade Lord prepared to move again. Then everything shifted. A crushing force descended from above. Feng Bo's massive body, which had been preparing to strike, was forced downward. Its knees buckled as it crashed into the frozen lake under overwhelming pressure. Between the beast's eyes stood a lone figure, fists clenched. It was the God of the East. Within the Blade Lord's mind, recognition surged. This was the man who had once handed him his first defeat, the one who had forced him into isolation training and delayed his grand plans. Even after 20 years, Arc Wui appeared unchanged, though the injury to his right arm was evident. Yet despite that, he had subdued the colossal beast with only his left hand. From afar, Hwang Heol could not hide his shock. Not only the demon god, but now the God of the East had appeared as well. Memories resurfaced. 20 years ago, when they had first attempted to claim Changbai Mountain, it was this very man who had crushed their forces with ease. But something did not add up. If the demon god had arrived first and already confronted the beast, then it meant he had also clashed with the God of the East. Realization dawned as Hwang Heol noticed Arc Wui's right arm twisted unnaturally. Within his mind, he pieced it together. The God of the East had lost to Yo-won. And yet, Yo-won, known for showing no mercy to his enemies, had not finished him. Their battle must have been interrupted by the emergence of the Wind-White Tiger. A thought began to form. If both of them stood here now, having halted their fight, then perhaps that fragile balance could be broken. Hwang Heol raised his voice, directing it toward the God of the East, revealing that the Wind-White Tiger's core was now in Yo-won's possession. At those words, Arc Wui's gaze shifted immediately to Yo-won. Within his mind, unease surfaced. He had indeed entrusted Yo-won with that task, yet the outcome defied expectation. A mythical creature should perish the moment its essence core was removed. moved, yet Feng Bo still lived. Huang Heol pressed further, his tone laced with sarcasm, provoking Arc Wui by questioning whether he would simply allow Yo-1 to take the core, even hinting at his earlier defeat. Before he could finish, Arc Wui moved. His fist extended forward, the space itself twisted. A crushing force surged outward, accompanied by a violent wind pressure that struck directly toward Huang Heol. Caught off guard, the two Supremes rushed in to protect him. Drawing their swords, they unleashed their full power, creating a massive wave of energy to counter the incoming force. It was not enough. The collision erupted with overwhelming intensity. Both Supremes were thrown back instantly, unable to withstand the sheer force of Arc Wui's attack. Though they had succeeded in shielding Huang Heol from death, the cost was severe. They collapsed to their knees, coughing up blood as internal injuries spread through their bodies. Within his mind, Huang Heol struggled to comprehend it. These two, once candidates for Blade Master and among the highest-ranking martial figures, had endured such damage from a single strike. Even warriors comparable to the greatest masters had been overwhelmed so effortlessly. Nearby, the Blade Lord observed the scene coldly. He deemed their performance inadequate, yet his focus remained divided. The humiliation he had suffered 20 years ago at Arc Wui's hands still burned within him, but the demon god now posed an equally pressing threat. Within his mind, he reached a decision. There was only one path forward: defeat Yo-1, seize the Essence Core, and then confront the God of the East. Acting swiftly, he transmitted his intent to Huang Heol, ordering him to hold back Arc Wui while he dealt with Yo-1. Though hesitant, Huang Heol accepted. Raising his voice, he commanded the Berserk Saber Sect to target the God of the East and stop him at all costs. Before the order could fully echo across the battlefield, the ground trembled. A massive presence stirred as Feng Bo rose once more. Its four limbs spread wide as it unleashed a thunderous roar, shaking the surroundings with overwhelming force. Shock spread among them. They had believed the creature had fallen after Arc Wui's strike, yet it stood again. Huang Heol felt dread grip him as he sensed the overwhelming killing intent radiating from the beast. Even without its essence core, Feng Bo's presence remained terrifying. Arc Wui watched in disbelief. Even after losing the core and enduring his ultimate attack, the creature had not fallen. He could not determine what sustained it, but if Feng Bo had surpassed death itself through sheer rage and hatred, then the danger had escalated far beyond anything he had anticipated. A deafening roar tore through the heavens. The dark clouds blanketing the sky churned violently in response. For a brief moment, the rain halted, only to return with far greater intensity. Thunder rumbled as lightning split the sky, and violent winds spiraled around Changbai Mountain, forming towering tornadoes. Everything escalated at once. Shock spread across the battlefield as the environment itself turned hostile. The warriors of the Berserk Saber were lifted helplessly into the air, caught in the storm's overwhelming force. Amid the chaos, an impossible sight unfolded. The gaping wound in Feng Bo's chest began to regenerate. Even without its essence core, the flesh knit itself back together. This was no longer a power tied to the core. The creature itself had transcended that limitation. Clinging to the black tiger's fur, Arc Wui felt his body stiffen. Within his mind, a memory resurfaced. The same catastrophe from 100 years ago, when Feng Bo's rampage had annihilated the land surrounding the mountain. His gaze hardened. If the creature could not die even after losing its core, then only one conclusion remained. Its head had to be severed. Resolving himself, he bit his lip, preparing for what had to be done. Within the storm, Feng Bo stood at the center of the howling winds. As the torrent split around him, something deeper stirred, an ancient memory rising from within. Long ago, upon the divine mountain he once inhabited, travelers had come from distant lands. Martial artists, seekers, and Taoists in training. All of them had been driven by the same desire to obtain the true chi that formed the source of his power. From the moment of his birth, he had been pursued. All he had ever wanted was to gather his spiritual energy in peace and ascend quietly, yet the relentless pursuit of humans had never ceased. Though anger stirred within him, he avoided unnecessary bloodshed, choosing retreat over conflict whenever possible. As his spiritual energy grew and the time of ascension approached, he gained the ability to change his form at will. With it, he evaded those who hunted him more easily. Time passed, and a new wind-white tiger was born. The arrival of a successor marked the nearing of his own ascension. Having once learned by observing the previous white tiger, he now found unexpected joy in guiding the newborn. Yet the young tiger was restless and full of instinct. Despite repeated warnings, it could not suppress its nature. Its actions drew attention, exposing them to humans far more often than before. Then one day, the young tiger vanished. Concerned, Feng Bo searched the entire mountain until he finally found it, at the northern edge, surrounded by a group of humans. A familiar dread surfaced. He had warned countless times that humans were relentless in their desires, that they would never give up. The young one, inexperienced and weak, would not be able to escape them. Feng Bo resolved that he had no choice left. Humans had driven him to the point where more bloodshed became inevitable. As he rushed forward to save the young tiger, something unexpected unfolded. A middle-aged man appeared without warning and cut down the surrounding martial artists with ease. Though they were clearly trained fighters, they stood no chance against him. Feng Bo sensed danger in that man immediately. Even at the peak of his own spiritual power, the presence of that figure felt unsettling. He moved closer. The man declared that anyone who dared set foot on the mountain from that moment onward would be killed, protecting the divine guardian of Mount Bakedu. It was their first encounter. The man then observed Feng Bo, noting that he did not appear injured. Feng Bo responded with a low growl. The man simply smiled and advised him not to reveal himself to humans again before turning away and leaving. He was Sakyong. Confusion lingered within Feng Bo. Sakyong had not pursued his essence core, nor shown any greed. He had merely eliminated the threat and departed. Despite living for centuries, Feng Bo had never encountered a human like him. Curiosity took hold. From that moment, Feng Bo began to watch him. Sakyong settled within the mountain, devoting himself to training. There was nothing outwardly unusual, yet Feng Bo remained cautious. Someone of that strength-changing intentions would pose a serious danger, so he chose to observe from a distance. Over time, patterns emerged. Sakyong killed every invader who approached from the north without hesitation, yet for reasons unknown, he spared those who came from the southern peninsula. His actions were selective, almost contradictory, and difficult to understand. 5 years passed. Throughout that time, Sakyong continued his routine, training and eliminating intruders. The young white tiger, having once been saved by him, gradually grew close to Sakyong. Still, Feng Bo did not lower his guard. He remained watchful, intending to continue until his own ascension. Then, one day, Sakyong addressed him directly. With casual familiarity, he called out to the tiger, suggesting they share a drink out of boredom. Feng Bo ignored him and walked away. Sakyong, already drunk, protested loudly, insisting that Feng Bo understood him. Feng Bo dismissed him as an audacious human. In all his long life, no human had ever spoken to him in such a manner. Though he pretended not to understand, Sakyong continued to talk to him regardless. Over time, something changed. Nearly a month later, Feng Bo found himself drawn to Sakyong's foolish humor. The strange human, who brewed alcohol from mountain spring water, spoke endlessly, recounting his past and grievances. Eventually, Feng Bo began to sit with him. He listened as Sakyong rambled about his past as a soldier from the southern peninsula, complaining about lost glory and ignored counsel. Like many humans, he spoke with frustration and pride, yet there was something different in the way he carried himself. Feng Bo, who had once avoided all contact, now found himself drinking alongside him, listening to those meaningless yet oddly compelling stories. Sakyong continued speaking with unrestrained bluntness, criticizing scholars with careless disdain. Within his mind, Feng Bo found it strangely enjoyable. Though he had lived for centuries, this kind of human, unpredictable, unrestrained, felt refreshing in a way he had never experienced before. That man became the first human to witness his ability to take on a human form. At the sight, Sakyong reacted with astonishment, openly marveling at the transformation. Yet even after witnessing such a divine ability, he did not change. Instead, he continued to joke as if nothing had altered, treating it with the same irreverent humor. When Feng Bo showed interest in his training, the man began teaching him blade techniques. Though he had once been instructed never to pass on those teachings, he dismissed it lightly, reasoning that no one had forbidden him from teaching a tiger. Feng Bo accepted the teachings with enthusiasm. What began as casual instruction soon grew serious as he learned at an astonishing pace. Recognizing this, Sakyong expanded his teachings, guiding him through more advanced techniques. When it came time to learn circulation methods, something unexpected occurred. Sakyung discovered that Feng Bo already possessed an essence core within his chest, yet through training, another core began forming within his dantian. The phenomenon was unprecedented. Feng Bo grew excited and devoted himself even more to training. Over time, his behavior began to shift. He started speaking in a manner similar to Sakyung, adopting his tone and expressions. At one point, Feng Bo questioned whether Sakyung had no friends, prompting an irritated response. In an attempt to prove otherwise, the man left the mountain and returned with someone else. That person was Ark Wui. Feng Bo was surprised. Given the Sakyung's apparent disdain for people from Zhongyuan, bringing someone from there seemed contradictory. Sakyung laughed it off, acknowledging that exceptions always existed. Ark Wui, upon meeting Feng Bo, reacted with amusement, remarking on the unusual bond between a human and a mythical creature. Unlike others, Ark Wui showed no desire for Feng Bo's essence core. His presence was steady, his energy vast, and his demeanor that of a true martial master. The time they spent together became the most joyful period of Feng Bo's long life. For the first time, he experienced companionship, something he had never known despite centuries of existence. It felt as though the heavens had granted him a final gift before his ascension. That happiness endured, carrying him forward toward the moment he had awaited for so long. As a spirit beast that had gathered spiritual energy over a long passage of time, Feng Bo finally reached the destined moment of ascension. Sakyung stood before him, offering congratulations while carrying a quiet sadness at the departure of an old friend. Feng Bo smiled, accepting that every meeting inevitably led to a parting, recognizing it as the unchanging nature of life. Sakyung bid him farewell with determination, declaring that he would train relentlessly and ascend to the heavens as well, refusing to fall behind or be overshadowed. Ark Wui, however, questioned the absence of the young wind-white tiger, sensing something incomplete in the moment. Sakyung explained that the young one had been complaining for days, unable to accept the separation, and dismissed it as the child's own loss if he chose not to witness the farewell. Feng Bo remarked on the Sakyung's unwavering composure, even in the face of parting, then stated that he would go ahead first and urged him not to delay too long. Everything had unfolded perfectly until the very instant Feng Bo prepared to depart. A sudden surge of unknown, sinister energy tore through the mountain. Sakyung reacted in shock, startled by the presence and demanding to know who had dared to invade their domain. Ark Wui focused on the disturbance, sensing spiritual chi within it and questioning whether it was the presence of a mythical creature. Feng Bo grew uneasy, deep within realizing that it did not feel like any mythical creature. His instincts flared violently, warning him of something far more dangerous. Sakyung, however, dismissed the concern and told Feng Bo to continue on his path, taking responsibility upon himself to confront whatever had appeared. Feng Bo hesitated, calling out to Sakyung with urgency, his concern growing as he sensed how different and ominous the energy felt, doubting whether even Sakyung could withstand it. Sakyung responded with laughter, recalling that he had once been known as the greatest martial artist in the world even before becoming Feng Bo's closest companion, confident that no one could stand against him. With that unwavering confidence, Sakyung turned and walked toward the source of the ominous presence. Watching him leave, Feng Bo felt the unease within him fade, calmed by Sakyung's words. At heart, he chose to trust him and shifted his focus back to ascension, believing that everything would be fine, but everything went wrong. As Feng Bo concentrated on ascending, he began to feel Sakyung's energy weakening. Soon after, a piercing cry echoed through the mountain, the anguished wail of the young white tiger, filled with the sound of suffering and impending death. The weight of both sensations shattered Feng Bo's concentration. No matter how he tried, he could no longer maintain focus. In the end, he abandoned his ascension and rushed toward the source of the disturbance. Ark Wui called out to him, questioning why he would abandon his ascension at such a crucial moment. Feng Bo, filled with urgency, declared that a far greater problem had arisen, realizing that Sakyung and the young tiger were now in grave danger. Feng Bo and Ark Wui arrived at the scene, their eyes widening as the sight before them unfolded in sheer horror. An unidentified man stood there, calmly pulling out the core of the young white tiger. There was not a trace of emotion on his face. The man observed Feng Bo with interest, recognizing him as another wind-white tiger in human form. and began approaching with a blue sword in hand. Nearby, Sakyong lay collapsed, both arms severed, blood spilled from his mouth as he struggled to breathe. With what little strength remained, he urged Feng Bo to run, warning that the man before them was no ordinary being but a monster. His voice faded as his eyes closed, his body going still. The unidentified man let out a faint smirk, remarking on the fortune of encountering two wind-white tigers in succession, as if savoring an abundant harvest. At the sight of Sakyong's fallen form, Feng Bo's thoughts shattered. A roar erupted from him, raw and uncontrollable. The thought of ascension vanished completely, replaced by a surging tide of hatred. Feng Bo transformed into his true form with a single purpose: to kill. From that moment on, nothing remained in his awareness. Hatred and the urge to destroy consumed everything. By the time clarity returned, the peaks surrounding Changbai Mountain had already been reduced to ruin. Heavy blows struck against him, one after another, each powerful enough to drag him back toward reality. It was Arc Wui who stopped him, preventing him from losing himself entirely. Arc Wui's voice cut through the chaos, pointing out that Sakyong was still alive and questioning whether Feng Bo intended to destroy everything without even listening to him. That realization pierced through the haze. The young white tiger was already dead, but Sakyong still clung to life, barely breathing. Feng Bo rushed to him, calling his name repeatedly. Sakyong coughed, blood spilling as he spoke faintly. He reflected that the day had seemed like it would be a good one, yet it had turned out otherwise. There was a quiet regret in him, a wish that he could have witnessed Feng Bo's ascension with his own eyes, but that chance had been lost because of him. Feng Bo refused to accept it. Driven by desperation, he bit into his own arm and let his blood flow into Sakyong's mouth, recalling from long ago that human bodies could gain strength and recover faster by consuming his blood. But it became the worst possible choice. Sakyong's arms had already been severed, and even his dantian was destroyed. His body was too weakened to endure even a trace of Feng Bo's spiritual power. Feng Bo felt it deep within. This was wrong. It should not have been like this. He could not bear to watch his friend suffer as death drew closer. Yet Sakyong spoke without resentment. Through labored breaths, he reflected that he had experienced something truly meaningful before the end, and that if not for the man responsible, the day would have remained a good one. Feng Bo refused to accept it, calling his name again and again, unable to let go. Even Arc Wui shed tears at the sight. As Sakyong's life faded, the anger within Feng Bo began to rise once more, violent and consuming. The desire to hunt down that man and tear him apart piece by piece surged through him. But Sakyong, with what strength he had left, made a final request. He asked Feng Bo to ascend, urging him not to throw away the meaning of his life in pursuit of revenge. Feng Bo's hand trembled violently as those words reached him, unable to accept what he was being asked to let go of. Sakyong let out a faint, breathless laugh, recognizing that Feng Bo would never yield easily. Even as his life slipped away, he turned his concern toward them, asking Arc Wui to stop Feng Bo if anything were to happen, and to ensure he would not lose himself in something pointless and reckless. Even at the edge of death, his thoughts remained with them. Feng Bo's voice rose sharply, demanding to know if Sakyong doubted his ability to kill the one responsible. Sakyong, struggling to breathe, reflected on their long bond, acknowledging Feng Bo as his closest friend. With fading strength, he reminded him that everything he had built was for his dream, urging him to leave the rest to Arc Wui. His gaze began to lose focus, his vision blurring. The warmth left his body, as though his soul had already departed. Feng Bo called out to him in desperation, unable to accept that the man once regarded as the strongest in the world could fall like this. Arc Wui gripped Sakyong's shoulders and shook him, trying to rouse him, but nothing changed. Feng Bo's voice broke as he tried to speak further, wishing to say more, to see him once again, but before the words could be completed, Sakyong was gone. A raw scream tore out of him. The moment the strength drained from his hands, Feng Bo felt something within him shatter completely. Only one thought remained: revenge. It no longer mattered what kind of being his enemy was. The hunger consuming him would not be satisfied until that man was found and torn apart. Arc Wui stepped forward, confronting him, questioning whether he would discard his friend's final wish for the sake of vengeance, reminding him that Sakyong's last request had not been revenge, but his ascension. Feng Bo's response came cold and unyielding, warning Arc Wui not to stand in his way, as even he could become a victim if he pushed further. Hatred and killing intent had already begun to stain Feng Bo's spiritual power. Once tainted, it would only continue to corrupt him, making ascension impossible unless it was purified. Arc Wui chose to bear that burden himself. He offered to to take on Feng Bo's anger, declaring that if even he could not endure it at his place of ascension, then Feng Bo would be free to do as he wished. Feng Bo's expression darkened as he absorbed those words, struck by the weight of what Arc Wui was offering. From that moment on, Arc Wui stood against him, allowing Feng Bo to release his rage, killing intent and hatred once every 10 years. Time dulled memories for humans, blurring even the most painful wounds. But for a spiritual being, the passage of time brought no such mercy. Even after 100 years, the memory of Sakyung's death remained as vivid as ever. Everything had been taken from him. With each passing day, the hatred only deepened, growing until it twisted into a desire to slaughter all people of the Central Plains. Anyone who entered the mountain became a target, their blood staining his hands. The hatred he carried mirrored the same hatred Sakyung once held. With constant bloodshed, there was no purification, only an ever-growing killing intent that consumed him further. And then, on this day, Feng Bo sensed it again. Traces of that monstrous man, those who appeared now, were unmistakably connected to the one he despised beyond all else. Feng Bo's resolve hardened as he believed that even Sakyung's spirit was now aiding him. The covenant, the consequences, none of it held meaning anymore. In that moment, he resolved to erase every one of his enemies from existence. The urge to slaughter them all consumed him completely, leaving no room for anything else. But that desire was cut short. A sharp slash tore across his neck. In that instant, as he had fully surrendered himself to hatred, the sensation struck him with sudden clarity. Wind and rain swept across the mountain as he looked ahead with a bitter expression, unable to tell whether the moisture on his face came from tears or from the falling rain. His gaze landed on Arc Wui. Within his mind, confusion surfaced as he saw the expression on Arc Wui's face, one that seemed on the verge of breaking. At the same time, he noticed Sakyung's sword in Arc Wui's hand, realizing something that should never have happened. Arc Wui, who had once sworn never to wield a weapon in his life, had broken that vow, and Feng Bo understood. It was because of him. As that realization settled, his thoughts turned to Sakyung. In the final moment, as his head separated from his body, only a single thought remained. Perhaps this outcome was for the best. The storm howled. Rain and wind churned beneath darkened clouds, casting a heavy sorrow over everything. With the severing of Feng Bo's head, the raging typhoon that had engulfed the mountain began to weaken, its fury fading along with him. Arc Wui stood there, holding the bloodstained sword, his expression weighed down by grief. In a low, bitter murmur, he accepted the burden left behind, resolving to carry all of Feng Bo's hatred. He believed that Feng Bo would meet Sakyung again in the afterlife, and that his own time would come soon enough. When that moment arrived, he longed for them to reunite and share a drink once more, just as they had in the past. Thunder rumbled across the sky. Arc Wui lifted his gaze upward, but the rain showed no sign of stopping. Amid the storm, blazing black flames streaked across the sky, carving countless trails through the air. Amid the chaos of wind and rain, only the sound of the sword cut through the surroundings with absolute clarity. The Blade Lord declared his intent to kill the demon god here and alter the course of the future. At the mention of the future, Chunyo-won's eyes narrowed slightly, questioning the meaning behind those words. With a surge of energy, the Blade Lord thrust his hand forward, forming a massive invisible sword infused with ice chi. The air trembled as it took shape. With unwavering determination, he charged forward, unleashing the first codified form of the extreme art of the Blade God. Yo-won shifted his stance. The Blade Lord observed carefully, recognizing the nature of the technique. The formless blade, carrying absolute yin, froze everything in its path. It mirrored the heavenly demon sword art exactly as described in the records he had studied. Those same records assured him that even against the demon god, he would not be defeated. They also spoke of a method to counter the heavenly demon sword art, one discovered long ago. Confidence surged within him as he laughed, convinced that even a sword art created by the heavenly demon could no longer prevail against the perfected extreme art of the Blade God. Then, a black invisible flame chi sword formed in Yo-won's right hand. The Blade Lord's eyes sharpened at the sight. The sword carried both the energy of the heavenly demon and the flames of the Kirin, an impossible fusion that defied his understanding. Within his mind, confusion confusion arose as he questioned how an invisible blade could possess multiple attributes. But the strangeness did not end there. Yowan's sword extended forward, carving through the air as trails of black flames followed its movement. This was not the sword force of the heavenly demon that the Blade Lord knew. Something about it was entirely different. As wind and rain swept across the battlefield, the traces of black flames formed countless intersecting lines, resembling the structure of the extreme art of the Blade God itself. The Blade Lord's expression darkened. Deep within, realization struck that this did not align with the records he trusted. The technique before him could not be countered. Instead, it was completely overwhelming the very art he believed to be superior. A strained cry escaped him as he demanded to know what kind of sword art this was. Yowan watched him being pushed back, a faint smile forming on his lips as he revealed that this is the sword art of the demon god. The words echoed in the Blade Lord's mind, leaving him shaken. No such sword art had ever been recorded. Yowan continued, declaring the third formation, Heaven Slaying, the Absolute Blade. In the next instant, the Blade Lord's invisible sword shattered. The black flames surged forward, drawn by the overwhelming technique. The force engulfed him completely. His body was torn apart as flesh and bone were ripped open, burned, and pierced by the invisible blade infused with black flames. When the attack subsided, his broken body sank into the frozen lake below. Each raindrop that touched his exposed wounds sent waves of pain through him. He could not comprehend what had just happened. He had been defeated. According to the records he had relied upon, the demon god at this stage should not have even been capable of standing before him. Defeat weighed heavily on the Blade Lord as his thoughts spiraled. Within his mind, he acknowledged that he had lost in every possible way. Even after absorbing the Great Peng's essence, he had been inferior in chi. In the clash of techniques, his opponent had displayed a sword art that surpassed even the heavenly demonic sword art. None of it aligned with the records he had trusted. The demon god was never meant to possess such power at this point in time. Confusion consumed him as he questioned where everything had gone wrong. The future he believed in, gaining eternal life, becoming an immortal, ruling Jianghu, crumbled before him. Losing to the god of the east had been understandable, as that existence had never been accounted for in the records. But the demon god was not supposed to be beyond them. The shock of his defeat spread across the battlefield. The warriors of the Berserk Saber stared in disbelief, unable to accept what they had witnessed. To them, the Blade Lord had been an absolute existence. The idea that the demon god could surpass him shattered their certainty. Huang Heol, wrapped in bandages, felt the weight of that collapse. Inside, panic rose as he watched their morale crumble. If nothing was done, everything they had built would fall apart. A voice reached him through telepathy. He turned toward its source. The Right Supreme conveyed his decision with calm resolve, stating that he and the Left Supreme would lead the remaining demonic Iron Squad and disciples to hold off the two overwhelming enemies. Huang Heol was instructed to retreat with the Blade Lord and the other leaders without delay. Huang Heol resisted, unable to accept that they would sacrifice themselves, insisting on gathering all remaining forces instead. But deep within, he already understood the enemies they faced were beyond anything they could handle. The Left Supreme revealed their final measure. They would use the divine blood reversal gathering technique, choosing to die together with their enemies. Faced with their unwavering resolve, Huang Heol fell silent. The Right Supreme then raised his voice, commanding the warriors. He declared that unless those two monsters were killed here, there would be no future for them. All restrictions were lifted, and they were ordered to kill by any means necessary. The surviving warriors responded, their voices unified yet laced with hesitation. At once, they activated the blood reversion art. Their bodies began to distort violently. Muscles bulged, veins swelled, and feral growls echoed across the battlefield like the cries of beasts. In that moment, Arc Wui stepped forward. At heart, he welcomed it, seeing this as an opportunity to release what had long been building within him. The Berserk Saber warriors, now consumed by frenzy, charged at him from all sides. Arc Wui clenched his fist, gathering chi. As he extended his arm, the very space before him warped. Waves of chi surged outward, slicing through the charging warriors and tearing their bodies apart into fragments. His voice turned cold as he called them forward, declaring that not a single one of them would be spared. Yet something something caught his attention. Some warriors had instinctively protected their heads at the cost of their bodies. Though torn apart, their flesh began to regenerate rapidly. Ignoring the pain, they rose once more and advanced toward him again, relentless and undeterred. Ark Wui looked upon the warriors who had twisted their bodies through forbidden means and recognized that they were abandoning their humanity to become monsters. In his eyes, such resistance would only end once they were completely crushed. At the same time, Chun Yo-won advanced toward the Blade Lord, whose body remained embedded in the frozen ground. Before he could reach him, two figures lunged forward with feral intensity. The two Supremes, having unleashed the reversion art, charged at Yo-won with overwhelming force. Their attacks collided with Yo-won's defense in a violent clash. Yo-won observed them calmly. From his assessment, their offensive power alone exceeded the peak of the profound realm. Even without relying on the reverse blood great divine art, they were masters who stood on equal footing with the five greats. Without hesitation, Yo-won moved. His invisible sword pierced through their flesh. The two Supremes endured the damage, driven by a single purpose: to buy time. From the beginning, they had known victory was impossible. Their lives held no weight compared to ensuring the Blade Lord's escape. As the battle raged, other warriors watching from nearby seized the moment. Seeing Yo-won occupied with the Supremes, they charged forward, believing that if fortune favored them, they might succeed in bringing him down. Their sword chi surged as they struck with full force. Yet the moment their attacks met Yo-won's form, the energy split apart. The black armor he wore absorbed and deflected their blows with ease, far surpassing anything they had anticipated. Even sword chi, capable of cutting iron and splitting stone, failed to leave a mark. Yo-won's lips curved faintly, his expression carrying quiet amusement as he recognized their misunderstanding. In the next instant, he moved. His two fingers shot forward and pierced into the right Supreme's eyes. A scream tore from him as he clutched his face, blinded in agony. Before the sound could fully fade, Yo-won's invisible blade swept through the air. Both the right and left Supremes were beheaded in a single motion. The surrounding warriors cried out in shock as they witnessed the fall of their leaders. Yo-won turned his gaze toward them, a faint smile still lingering as he made it clear that they had no time to mourn. Their own lives were already on the line. His invisible sword moved again. In a single sweep, it cut through the throats of the warriors behind him. Amid the chaos, one of the surviving warriors rushed toward Hwang Heol, attempting to report the deaths of the two Supremes. But Hwang Heol remained focused, reminding him that their only objective now was to rescue the Blade Lord. Without hesitation, they moved. The remaining warriors rushed toward the frozen lake, where the Blade Lord lay battered and broken. One of them reached him first, urgently checking his condition, hoping he was still alive. Another stepped forward, taking responsibility, deciding that while Hwang Heol commanded the survivors, he would carry the Blade Lord on his back and lead the escape. Hwang Heol took command, deciding to lead the escape himself. Urgency filled his voice as he pushed the remaining warriors forward, knowing they had to flee before the demon god turned his attention to them. They moved quickly, attempting to escape the impending wrath. But their intentions had already been seen through. Surrounded by more than 200 red-eyed warriors, Yo-won assessed the situation. Cutting them down one by one would take too long. With cold eyes, he realized that their goal was simply to buy time. Yo-won raised his arm toward the darkened sky, his voice carrying a chilling certainty as he dismissed their efforts. Thunder rumbled above. Lightning flashed violently through the clouds. Even the warriors, whose minds had been clouded by the blood reversion art, hesitated in confusion at the unnatural phenomenon unfolding before them. As Yo-won lowered his hand, the sky answered. The dark clouds unleashed a barrage of lightning. Massive bolts crashed down, turning the battlefield into chaos. Bodies convulsed as electricity tore through them. The ground flooded beneath the storm, and more than 200 warriors were struck down, their forms overwhelmed by the relentless lightning. Amid the devastation, Hwang Heol bit down hard, forcing himself to remain composed. He and a small group pressed forward through the forest, carrying the Blade Lord on their backs as they fled. Within his mind, disbelief surfaced. Even if Yo-won had obtained the Dragon Turtle's core, which wielded lightning chi, this display far exceeded reason. His gaze shifted toward the Blade Lord's battered form. At heart, he had always believed that only the Blade Lord, having reached the peak of martial arts, stood just beneath the realm of the gods. Yet now, that belief had been shattered. Although the Blade Lord had absorbed a core that should have accelerated his recovery, his wounds showed little sign of healing. Hwang Heol recognized the cause. The fierce demonic nature embedded within Yo-Won's formless sword was suppressing that regeneration. The outcome weighed heavily on him. Countless elite warriors of the Berserk Saber had been sacrificed, only for the battle to end in complete defeat. The humiliation of it burned deep within him as they continued their desperate escape. As he was carried away, the Blade Lord concentrated on expelling the lingering energy within him. Inside, his fury surged violently, reigniting the same intensity he had once felt after losing to the God of the East. With that burning rage, he raised his voice and declared that the grand plan of their clan would never cease. He called on everyone to remember the blood and sacrifices made that day, vowing that before long, he himself would personally bring down the demon god. At that very moment, brilliant blue rays of light descended before them, crashing down and blocking their path. The group came to an abrupt halt. Hwang Heol's voice trembled as recognition struck him. Within, he identified the phenomenon as Heaven Flash. Before the realization could settle, Yo-Won descended from the sky. He landed directly in front of them, cutting off any path of escape, and declared with certainty that there would be no next time for them, addressing the Blade Lord as nothing more than a false blade god. With a single motion, Yo-Won threw the severed heads of the two Supremes before them. The impact of his words struck deeper than the sight itself. Not only the Blade Lord, but Hwang Heol and the other masters were shaken, unable to conceal their shock at the mention of the Blade God. The Blade Lord's rage erupted. He rejected the claim, insisting that although he had not yet inherited that title, Yo-Won had no right to even speak its name. Yo-Won paused. Within his mind, a realization began to form. The mention of inheritance suggested that the title of Blade God held a significance similar to that of the heavenly demon within his own cult. He recalled what Chun Musong had said, that a descendant from the future had traveled to the past. Considering this, another possibility surfaced. It could be that someone from the Berserk Saber in the future had inherited the title of Blade God. Yet the records left behind spoke clearly of time travel, leaving the truth uncertain and unresolved. The Blade Lord's voice cut through his thoughts, demanding his attention. Yo-Won responded calmly, admitting that while he was uncertain about some things, one truth remained clear. The Blade Lord standing before him was not the one who deserved that title. The Blade Lord clenched his teeth, anger tightening his expression as he demanded to know what nonsense Yo-Won was speaking. Yo-Won dismissed the need for explanation. The Blade Lord's fury deepened, unable to accept such disregard. Yo-Won's voice turned cold as he judged him without hesitation. For someone who had fled after sacrificing his own subordinates, he deemed him unworthy, not only of the title, but even of leadership itself. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.